Chapter 1 opens with a man walking along a road with no destination, following the path in search of his end. A mighty wall known as Jan Desa Ro closes off the world. This wall protects the kingdom of Kyujul and stretches far into the sky, except for one gap. That gap lies within the Pakura district, where the Terja family are lords of the region and have hindered Kyujul invasions since time immemorial. Creatures pour through the opening and advance toward a settlement. A child calls out to their father as someone shouts that the door must be closed or everyone will be killed. The father cries out that it is already too late for him and speaks his final words, entrusting someone with the care of his daughter. The girl cries out in despair for her father as the creature lunges and attacks. Suddenly, other beasts are struck down from a distance. Both the father and daughter look up in surprise as a figure clad in armor rides forward on horseback. The rider draws near and urges the father to hurry and run. The scene then shifts to a girl walking through the forest, complaining that she cannot do it. She reaches the place and sees a man lying down. She begins reminiscing, revealing that the man is Bard Roan. The king once remarks that Bard is the one who aspires to become a knight and asks to whom he swears fidelity. Bard then swears his fidelity. Idra holds out a flower, causing Bard to react in surprise. She places the flower behind his ear and declares that this is her chance as she lies in Bard's body. Bard asks what Idra has done, addressing her as Miss Idra, and notices the flower. Idra laughs, explaining that she has dolled up Bard, and reminds him to drop the formalities. Roan thanks Idra warmly, this time addressing her as Lady Idra. Idra reacts in annoyance at being called a lady. Idra Terja is the daughter of the current lord of Pakura, Hadra Terja. She is clearly a tomboy who seems to prefer a sword over a sewing needle. Because of this, Idra's father always seems to have a troubled look on his face. Bard suddenly begins eating the flower. Idra asks what Bard is doing, and Bard replies that the flower's nectar is sweet. Idra tastes it and eagerly agrees. Her stomach suddenly releases a gurgling sound. Bard offers to catch some fish, playfully calling her princess hungry. His stomach also gurgles, leaving them both speechless. Bard readies his bow and arrow. Idra watches from the water's edge as his arrow hits something in the water. He pulls it out and sees that he has caught a fish. Idra remarks that she has always wondered how Bard can strike a moving target so perfectly, since she is barely capable of hitting one herself. Bard understands that Idra is attempting to strike the fish with an arrow. However, the fish tries to dodge the arrow, leaving her no way to land a hit. Idra agrees with this. She asks Bard what he means, but Bard playfully leaves the answer to her own thoughts. Idra attempts to catch fish while Bard watches her. Suddenly, something begins moving in the water. Idra looks on in surprise, draws her sword, and leaps forward. Bard watches and reacts in surprise. After a while, Idra's wet clothes hang to dry while Bard roasts fish over an open fire. Once it is finished, he tells Idra that the fish has finished roasting over the fire and offers her one. Idra sits far away, covered with a towel. She pouts and refuses because she failed to catch any fish to add to tonight's dinner. Bard playfully accepts this and decides that he will have to eat everything by himself. He begins eating and remarks that, just as he thought, the taste of fresh fish is out of this world. Hearing this, Idra becomes tempted and calls out for him to stop. Idra finally takes a bite, exclaims that it is delicious, and declares that these are the tastiest fish she has ever eaten in her entire life. Bard tells her that she is just exaggerating. Idra insists that it is the truth and asks what the fish is called. Bard explains that it is called Wajik. He mentions that the one they are eating is still small, but Wajik can grow to an astonishing size. Idra is surprised to learn that the fish is small. Bard confirms it and explains that the others will continue growing larger and tastier. Idra wonders whether they will taste even better than this one and remarks that she will become chubby if they get any tastier. Idra then calls Bard and asks him to help her with bow training again when the time comes so they can eat a big Wajik together. Bard agrees and tells her not to skip any of her sewing classes until then, though the maid is grieving at the time. Not long after, they ride a horseback. Idra calls out to Bard and asks whether he dreamed about anything. Bard becomes confused for a moment before Idra reminds him that he took an afternoon nap. Bard confirms that he did and explains that the dream was about his past. He shares that it was from the time when he took his knight's vow. Idra asks whether it was when her grandfather was leading the order. Bard confirms that it was and explains that Lord Elzero was ill-natured. He recounts that during the vowing ceremony, one could not swear loyalty to the head. He recalls that he vowed his fidelity lay with the people. Idra laughs and confirms that this was exactly what happened. Bard admits that he was in a tight spot back then. Suddenly, someone calls out to them, drawing their attention. A voice calls out to Bard. Bard looks over and recognizes the father who nearly died. He asks whether the man's body is okay. The man says that he is and thanks Bard once again for his help back then. He explains that he would have ended up inside a Kajil's stomach if not for Bard. He adds that he means it and that Bard's presence alone allows them to live in peace. The man's wife agrees, remarking that Bard is truly the people's knight. Bard tells them not to flatter him, since he was merely doing what he could. The man's daughter calls out to Bard and says that she will never forget how bravely he drove off the Kajil. Her mother notices that she is blushing like a tomato and suggests making her Bard's wife. The girl tells her mother to shut up and stammers. Bard laughs and scratches his head in embarrassment. Idra then calls Bard's attention by addressing him as Mr. Hero. Bard pats her head and tells her to quiet down. Idra screams in protest. The man asks whether Lady Idra is with Bard as well. Bard confirms it and explains that he is babysitting her. He calls her a tomboy and adds that she is quite a handful. Idra pouts while the man replies that a child is at their best when they are lively. Their journey back continues. Idra remains pouting as she tells Bard that everyone truly relies on him, as expected of the People's Knight. She then states that, as a lady of the Terja family, she holds him in very high regard. Bard notices her expression and asks why her face is all pouty like that. Idra suddenly draws her sword and insists that she is perfectly fine and fully capable of protecting herself. Bard nods in agreement. He tells Idra never to enter the forest when he is not around. Idra begins to protest but then confirms that she understands. She asks whether he is leaving starting tomorrow. Bard says that is correct. Idra wonders how long he will be gone. Bard replies that he is asking himself the very same question. Idra urges him to come back as soon as possible. As they ride away, Bard tells Idra that he will take her words to heart. Idra tells him to work hard. Bard then notices her swinging his sword dangerously and tells her to sheath it. Idra quickly agrees. The scene shifts to a large group of riders approaching a great wall as they return from their mission. One man remarks that they can finally see it, while another says that he simply wants to relax in his own bed at home. Bard rides toward the wall alongside the others. He looks ahead and sees Lord Hadra standing at the gate. Bard announces that his unit has returned and says that he will save his report about their location for later. Hadra calls to him and asks whether he happened to see Idra on his way there. Bard replies that they did not see each other. Hadra then explains that Idra saw a faint silhouette of troops coming through the forest and went to welcome them back, thinking it was his unit. She took only 2 men and ventured out of the castle. It is still midday, and the path is one she knows very well, so she went without saying anything more. Bard's expression grows serious. He turns and calls out sharply. A lone figure stands far off in the distance. Bard orders the watchtower to be placed on alert and all the torches to be lit. He further commands that the torches must not go out until the night has passed. Someone reacts in surprise. Hadra throws an object toward Bard and tells him to take it. Bard recognizes the demon's sword Morag Revilo. He grips the hilt firmly as his horse moves quickly beneath him. Bard rides swiftly through the forest. He thinks that if Idra indeed left the castle to welcome him, a certain problem arises depending on where she took her first turn to the right. Since Idra was always with him on horseback, she may have perceived the distance as shorter than it actually was. He believes that she took a closer path to the right instead of following the correct path. If that is the case, there is a similar right-bending path ahead. He reaches the path where there is a trail to the right and another to the left. Bard wonders whether Idra turned right or left and which path the lady followed. He thinks that it is probably too late now if she made a mistake here. Bard grips the reins tightly. His heart beats heavily within his chest. He calls out for his guardian deity Paterposa to hear him. He addresses the being as the Master of Dark and asks to be shown the path on which he is to proceed. He bows his head in prayer. A head suddenly appears before him, and Bard wonders if it is the spirit of the forest, the Badori Aura. 2 sets of eyes open and gaze to its left, revealing the path Idra took. Bard rides forward, acknowledging that he is in the being's debt. He speeds through the forest and arrives at the scene. A sword and shield lie discarded on the ground, causing him to look on with concern. A large beast looms nearby. One of the guards stands wounded, protecting Idra. Bard looks at the creature and initially thinks it is a Zusueba, but he notices its physique and bright red eyes. He wonders whether the creature has transformed into a Kajil. Bard grips the demon's sword and prepares to strike. Idra and the young guard look on in alarm. The beast snarls and lunges forward. Idra cries out in fear. Bard rides in, swinging his sword as he strikes. The beast is knocked back by the blow. Bard is thrown from his horse and lands hard on the ground. The beast rises and prepares to attack again. Bard pushes himself up and prepares to face the creature once more. The beast strikes Bard hard. Bard grits his teeth as the creature injures his face. The beast slams Bard against the ground and takes him deep into the forest. Idra calls out his name in alarm. The beast pins Bard against a tree as blood flows from his wounds. The creature leans over him and growls in his face. Bard groans in pain before driving his blade deep into the beast. The creature roars and pulls back, blood dripping from its jaws. Bard twists the weapon within the wound and laughs breathlessly through the struggle. The beast collapses and falls still. Night has fallen over the forest as Bard kneels hunched over, resting on one knee. He shifts slightly with a soft rustle of movement. He stands before the fallen beast while Idra looks on with an expression full of concern. Bard holds out a hand toward her but pulls it back when he sees that his hands are covered in blood. In the next second, Idra rushes to him and embraces him. Bard lets out a small cry of pain as he holds her close. Bard sits on the ground while holding Idra close. Idra rests against him and sniffs softly. Bard looks down at her with a gentle expression. After the incident, Lady Idra changes. She stands before a mirror and adjusts her hair, her locks growing longer and softer. Her boyish, open-hearted character seemingly disappears, while sympathy and kindness begin to emerge within her. She suppresses her habit of wanting to be involved in everything and instead steps back to support everyone else's actions. 3 years after the incident, Bard receives orders to go to the fortress standing at the gap in the wall. When he returns to the castle 3 months later, Idra's marriage to Kaldus Coendra has already been confirmed. 29 years later, in the year 4270, the fortress stands strong. Inside, soldiers train and practice with their weapons as blades clash loudly during combat drills. A man named Sidelmont fights with all his might, gritting his teeth as he parries a strike. He is fighting Bard, who is now 58 years old. Bard tells Sidelmont that he has become quite capable and exclaims with delight that Sidelmont can now withstand his blow. Sidelmont thanks Bard for all his guidance. Bard then follows with another strike, asking what Sidelmont would do if he fought that way. Sidelmont is knocked hard onto the stone ground. Bard laughs heartily and apologizes, explaining that he had gotten carried away, felt elated, and put in far more power than he needed to. Sidelmont states that he thought he was going to die and swears that one hit from Bard is heavier than one from a cudgel. The other soldiers agree with a laugh. Someone then shouts out in alarm, calling Bard. Bard stammers in surprise as Julran Terja appears, laughing and teasing Bard about the face he is making. Julran is a knight of Terja and the son of Lady Idra. Lady Idra was sent back to the Terja family 1.5 years after marrying into the Coendra family while she was embracing Julran, who was newly born. Bard scolds Julran for fooling around when training should have already begun. Julran tells Bard to take it easy, explaining that it is actually an emergency. He reveals that the conclusion of the Territorial Lords Conference has just been announced. For the next 10 years, revenue collected from the Zoraisa Silver Mine Mountain will be allocated to the reconstruction of lands ravaged by the war. Bard reacts in shock at the mention of Zoraisa. The conflict between the Nora family and the Coendra family, which took place in one corner of the continent's eastern frontier, has reached its conclusion. As a result, the Coendra family has become the most significant force near the border and has started calling themselves the overlords of the Shigenza region. The Terja family cannot afford to ignore this situation. The Shigenza region is ruled by an overlord and encompasses 3 districts. The Coendra family has been boasting about being the strongest army ever since the war, yet they have never defeated the Terja family. The Zoraisa Silver Mine and Libagia Copper Mine have been under the authority of the Terja family since old times. The Pakura district, governed by the Terja family, has held back invasions from the Kajil that came through the gap in the wall. Julran explains that their responsibilities have not changed, but now the Coendra family is taking away their financial resources. Sidelmont then states that the responsibility should lie with the Coendra family, which went around destroying the lands in the first place. Julran calls it a terrible joke. Another man grows angry and says that the Coendra family thinks they can do as they please now that they have become the overlord. He asks whether there is any possibility that they may come and attack their district. One man believes that the Coendra family will not be able to do as they please as long as Sir Bard stands with them. Another man declares that they have the invincible Galdi-Gash Gera, the people's knight, which is Bard. However, Bard admits that they currently have no other way forward except to give in to the Coendra family's demands. Julran and Sidelmont fall silent. Julran then agrees with Bard. The scene shifts to Terja's estate, where Bard sits alone in his room. He wonders whether he is here because that is what everyone says, but concludes that it is the other way around, since they are in this mess because of him. During these 50 years, he has feared that his name might have become a bit too popular due to all the fighting. He believes those Coendra are probably thinking of using him as one of their pawns in order to start the next territorial dispute. Eventually, all of the Terja family will be consumed by debt. Bard squeezes the glass too hard and breaks it. He realizes that he must have been a bit too hyper today and cries out in pain. Bard reflects that, right up until today, he has served the Terja family for 4 generations. It is no surprise that his body has aged and feels stiff all over. He feels certain that he does not have much time left in this old body of his. His mother and father are long gone, and he has not married anyone either. He recalls his disciples, such as Julran and Sidelmont, and admits that they have grown up to be splendid as well. Bard closes his eyes and then looks upward with a steady gaze, seemingly having reached a decision. The next day at Terja's estate, a knock sounds through the hallway. A maid enters and tells Sir Galliera that he has received a letter from Sir Bard. Julran wonders whether it is from his gramps Bard. Galliera opens the letter and notes that it is strange for Bard to go out of his way to write. He reads the news and reacts in shock. He calls out to Julren and orders him to run to Bard's quarters at once. Julren asks what exactly happened. Galliera reveals that Bard has retired as a knight and has also forfeited his quarters and all his asset. Julren is stunned by what he hears. The scene shifts to a quiet stretch of open land beneath the trees, with fruit growing heavy on the nearby branches. Bard picks up a fruit and takes a bite. He finds it delicious and asks his horse, Stablos, whether he would like to try some as well. Stablos gives a soft nicker in reply. Bard remembers that Lady Idra used to bake this fruit into a pie long ago and sighs happily at the memory. He holds out another piece, but the horse swallows it all down in one go, causing Bard to startle in surprise. In this way, Bard Roan, the old knight, departs on a journey. He does not know that this tale will later be passed down and told throughout the whole world. At this moment, it is remembered as the beginning of a great adventure. Chapter 2 opens with Bard's adventure. Jan Dessa Ro stands tall, the Great Wall rising high to protect humanity from the Kajil. In Pakura district, the Terja family tells tales of a knight who was never defeated. That knight is Bard Roan, known as the People's Knight. A little over a month has passed since Bard left the Terja family. He sits by a riverbank with his horse Stablos grazing nearby. Bard pulls hard on his line, surprised by the size of his catch. He reels it in with effort, only to be startled when a huge fish breaks the surface. Bard proudly holds the fish up, admiring how large it has grown and how well it has done. He is confident that it will definitely be delicious. A moment later, Bard hears someone approaching. He quietly reacts in surprise when he sees Sidelmont together with other knights, and his voice trembles slightly as he recognizes Sidelmont. Suddenly, Sidelmont and the others kneel before Bard and beg him to return. They explain that Lord Galliera is also deeply grieved by Bard's decision. Bard asks them to raise their heads and assures them that they do not need to be so polite, but they refuse and insist that they cannot do so. Sidelmont explains that the Coendra family has claimed the Terja family is lacking in consideration, and that they appear to be preparing a plot of land specifically for Bard. Bard apologizes to Sidelmont but firmly refuses to return. Sidelmont falls quiet and lowers his gaze. Considering the Coendra family's behavior up to that day, he realizes that he can guess their true intentions. 27 years ago, Caldus Coendra, then head of the family, suddenly requested to take Lady Idra as his wife. Caldus was an illegitimate child of the previous lord. The previous lord and all his sons died one after another due to unforeseen circumstances, causing Caldus to inherit the position of family head at the young age of 23. Under Caldus's leadership, the Coendra family forcefully expanded their territory, broke their neutrality, and began harassing the Terja family as well. For the good of the entire Shiguensa region, Lady Idra chose to marry into the Coendra family. Yet the wedding was repeatedly delayed for a year and a half. Idra was eventually sent back to the Terja family, bringing with her a newborn baby she had just given birth to. Messengers of inquiry and investigation were sent to the Coendra family, but they were returned as corpses. The Coendra family went so far as to attack the Pakura district under the pretense that the rudeness of the Terja family would be taken care of. The head of the Terja family at that time was angered by this behavior and recalled all the knights stationed at the fortress protecting Jan Dessa Ro. They broke through the attack and sent the enemy packing. Yet the Coendra family did not learn their lesson and attempted 5 invasions over the past 20 years. Bard notes that the Terja family defeated the Coendra family each and every time, and he finds it surprising that they are not yet bored of war. Sidelmont wonders how badly the Coendra family wants to bring the Terja family under their authority. Bard then begins thinking about the promised plot of land. Even though the Coendra family claims they will give the land to him, he realizes that it must have originally belonged to someone else. Sidelmont suspects that the Coendra family will seize this chance to start another territorial dispute, and Bard agrees. Bard notes that taking their cash cow, the Zariza Silver Mine Mountain, apparently was not enough for them. Sidelmont adds that they want to destroy the Terja family's military might. Bard confirms that Sidelmont is exactly right. Sidelmont speaks of such a situation, and Bard makes a low sound of understanding. They realize that this would be the perfect invitation for a Kajil invasion. Bard explains that if such a situation were to arise, Coendra would be unable to fight the war and would have their hands full dealing with the Kajil, making it difficult to understand whether they realize this. Sidelmont laughs and suggests that it probably will not come to that, since they have been taking care of it all this time. Bard then realizes that if the disposable pawn that is him no longer exists, their ambitions will not come to fruition either. In that case, the title of undefeated knight becomes such a nuisance. Bard looks at them and recognizes how well they have all grown up. He tells them that even if he is no longer there, Terja will be just fine, and entrusts Sidelmont with protecting Terja alongside Julren and the rest. Sidelmont stands and declares that the future of Terja can be left to them. He intends for them to work hard so that Bard can continue his journey without having to look back. Bard places a hand on Seidelmant's shoulder and leaves it to them. Seidelmant falls silent and asks Bard for just one moment. Bard reacts with an inquisitive sound. A man approaches and asks what happened and whether Seidelmant has finished talking to Bard. He greets Bard and addresses him as Roan. The man is Yodish Payne, a knight of the Coendra family. Bard recalls who Yodish is and remembers that he is Caldus's family nephew. Seidelmant tells Yodish that he is late and orders him to get down from his horse, pointing out that remaining mounted is extremely rude. Yodish addresses Seidelmant as Lord Seidelmant Expengler before stating that Bard is no longer a knight. He claims that Bard does not deserve a knight's greeting because he discarded his master. Seidelmant counters that Sir Bard swore fidelity to the people and insists that the vow has not yet been broken. Yodish is consequently forced to offer his greetings to Bard. Bard wonders what he should do and considers whether simply salting it with salt would suffice. Yodish climbs down from his horse and addresses Bard, explaining that if Bard claims the land, even though it does not have rootless grass, it will become better over time. He considers it a great offer, since both the Coendra and Tertia families still need Bard. Bard notes to himself that Yodish has a certain way of speaking. Bard tells Yodish that he will no longer fight and only wants to die in peace. Yodish reacts with confusion, questioning whether he heard Bard correctly. He calls out to Seidelmant and demands an explanation, reminding him that he was supposed to explain the situation to Bard properly and asking whether he had done so. Seidelmant ignores Yodish and turns to Bard instead. Seidelmant hands Bard a bag and delivers a message from Lord Galliera, wishing Bard a safe journey even if he does not intend to return. He explains that the offerings are from Lord Galliera. Bard considers the gesture and decides that he cannot refuse, as doing so would be extremely rude. Seidelmant and his companions bow as Bard accepts the gift. After a while, Bard is left alone and begins picking up rocks. He mumbles about what people call him. Even though he has stepped down as a knight and now travels as a wanderer, he has lived for 40 years and served only to protect the Pakura district. He admits that this is true and that all he ever did was fight. He then recalls the memory of himself and Idra fishing for food. Bard reflects that what he truly wanted to protect was Idra and admits that he was unable to keep that promise. He then realizes that he set out on this journey without saying a single word to Lady Idra. Stablos nuzzles him, and Bard reacts by asking what the matter is. He reassures the horse that he is all right. He gathers stones and arranges them neatly, noting that with this much material, they should be able to build a stove. Suddenly, Bard hears a running horse and is startled. He sees Yodish rushing toward him. Yodish calls out to him, addressing him respectfully as the people's knight. He explains that he forgot to take care of some unfinished business and therefore took the liberty of coming back. Bard asks what the matter is and tells Yodish to be quick about it. Yodish points toward Bard and explains that the business he means is Bard himself. He states that there seems to be no reason for Bard to still be alive. Bard remains silent but grips his sword. Yodish tells him to halt, explaining that he is not the one who is going to fight Bard. A man steps forward and addresses Bard by name, remarking that he has always wanted to meet him. Bard wonders how long the man has been there. His old scar begins throbbing, and he senses that this person is a little dangerous. He recalls that while he did say he wanted to die in peace, he never asked for any help with it. He does not know what business the man has there, but there is no way he will let Coendra use him as they see fit. Moreover, his preparations for Wajik are complete. He has let all the blood out of the fish and scaled it thoroughly as well. To Bard, the freshness is everything. He throws back his cloak and prepares himself. Yodish assures Bard that he does not need to worry and that, according to the request, he will not take up too much of Bard's time. Bard says nothing, as all his thoughts are with his grilled fish. The man then addresses Bard as Roan and commands him to die. Bard stands ready with his own weapon drawn as the man advances toward him. Chapter 3 continues with the fight between Bard and the man Yodish brought. The two stand facing each other in the clearing while Yodish watches from a distance. The dark-haired man holds his beautifully crafted sword. Bard admires the weapon and wonders how he could possibly use his own blunt sword, which he carries only for self-defense, against such a fine blade. A low sound of concern escapes him as he considers that he might actually die. The man formally requests a duel. Bard thinks about what a polite young man he is and decides that if they must fight, he will give it his all and hold nothing back. He accepts the request. In an instant, the man disappears from Bard's sight. The man then strikes with astonishing speed. Bard is shocked by how fast he is and is pushed back across the stony ground near the river. The situation looks rather worrisome to Bard, so he asks the man for his name. The man identifies himself as Ven Ural. Bard realizes who he is and understands why his old scar began to throb. Ven Ural is the rumored battle frenzy mercenary. A tale tells of an invisible red crow that flies and lands beside those about to die. When the bird is seen, the person dies. Because of this legend, people call Ven Ural the Roro Spear or Red Crow. Ven strikes rapidly, and Bard blocks the blow, the impact sending a sharp jolt through his arm. Ven presses forward with another swift attack, his cloak swirling around him. Bard meets his gaze and sees the intensity in Ven's eyes. His next strike shatters the guard on Bard's arm, leaving Bard shocked. Bard shifts his stance and counters with a strong swing of his own blade. Ven moves to evade, but Bard's weapon grazes him, drawing a surprised reaction from Ven. Both pause for a moment as they assess each other. Ven readies himself once more, and Bard prepares to meet the next charge. Bard recalls that if one cannot read an opponent's movements, they should feint when the opponent holds their sword in a middle stance. He executes the feint and manages to dodge a counterattack aimed at his head, remaining alive. Bard realizes that he is familiar with this style of fighting. A long time ago, when he received hands-on instruction from a wandering knight, he witnessed it countless times. He is therefore not mistaken if this is the fighting style Ven uses. Bard recognizes Ven as a legitimate practitioner of swordsmanship and a master-level swordsman. He understands that this is the same technique. Bard reflects that Ven's talent is on an entirely different level from his own. He was once a novice who built his skills only through endless battles. Bard wonders why such a skilled swordsman works as a mercenary, but then realizes that no matter how much he struggles, he cannot win. Bard decides that this situation calls for a certain strategy. If he is going to die anyway, he will at least land one strike. He plans to push forward and then immediately back off, aiming for the moment Ven's stance breaks before delivering a slash. He accepts the challenge, considering being killed by a swordsman of Ven's caliber an honorable end. Bard wonders where he should aim, considering the head or perhaps the legs. He sees that Ven is aiming for his legs, and by then, Bard has already come up with a plan. He remains standing and waits for Ven to come at him. Bard blocks Ven's attack, and the force sends Ven flying backward a good distance. Bard quickly picks up a heavy log and hurls it toward him. Ven moves aside and dodges, causing the log to continue straight ahead toward Yodish. Yodish cries out in alarm as the log hits the tree behind him. Yodish shouts angrily at Bard, calling him names. Ven stops Yodish, indicating that it is not his turn yet. Yodish angrily demands that Ven move aside, intending to attack Bard. Bard realizes that this is the time. He remembers that he taught this trick to prank others when he was young. He starts signaling his horse, Stablos. Once he gets Stablos' attention, Bard gives the command. Stablos begins kicking the rocks they collected earlier, sending them flying toward Yodish and Ven. Ven moves aside to dodge the rocks, but one strikes Yodish squarely, causing him to cry out in pain. Bard sees Yodish stumbling toward him. Bard really wants to land a hit on Ven if possible, but there seems to be no choice. Bard proceeds to strike Yodish, ending him. Ven stands still and glances at Yodish, who lies dead on the ground. Bard regards Ven's dead employer as a shameful outcome. Ven considers it no shame that such a person died and reveals that Yodish was not even his employer. Now that Yodish is gone, Ven no longer knows what he should do after killing Bard. In other words, he no longer has a reason to kill Bard, and their score will have to be settled at some other time. After a while, Bard sits in front of a bonfire. He wonders what exactly Yodish's true intention was. There is no doubt that Yodish wanted Bard dead, but Bard cannot help wondering for what purpose. He can understand if it was resentment, but he wonders why Yodish hired a mercenary. A man of Ven's caliber would be expensive, and Bard concludes that Yodish could not entrust the matter to any of his relatives or friends. Bard also has the feeling that Ven had some business to take care of after killing him. He wonders if Yodish needed to do something with his corpse or if the matter had something to do with something Bard himself owned. He opens the pouch containing the offerings from Galliera and finds it filled with coins, nothing out of the ordinary. Bard sets those thoughts aside and focuses on what is before him. A fine meal has been laid out, grilled wijik seasoned with salt, wild grass soup, and distilled liquor. Bard eats and drinks, feeling alive again. He remembers that it was all a parting gift sent by Sidelmont and reflects on what a thoughtful person Sidelmont is. He takes another drink and decides to eat some of the fish as well. Bard lays out an ornate knife and fork and begins his meal. He takes a bite of the fish and finds it tasty. The fat has seeped into the light meat in the back of the fish remarkably well. With each bite, the juices burst and a deep taste swirls around in his mouth. The meat from the stomach is so soft, with an inexplicable sweetness that melts in his mouth. He drinks and continues enjoying the taste. Because the fish is so fresh, even the guts are delicious, carrying a slightly bitter taste amid the sweetness that makes them especially good. Bard thinks that mixing the meat with the guts will make it even better. He continues eating the food with enjoyment, finding that the combination works. The grilled fresh fish, combined with the sweetness and fragrance of the guts, creates a wonderful taste, and Bard considers such enjoyment the privilege of a fisherman. The liquor has a delightful taste, and the soup is also quite tasty. Bard no longer cares about the Coendra family, Ven, or anything else. He focuses on enjoying wonderful food and great beverages, believing that there can be no greater happiness than these. Then he suddenly feels a pain in his back and realizes that there is no other way but to bear it. He has already done all that he was supposed to do, so now all that remains is to live and die. Bard stares into the fire as a memory comes to mind. When Bard is not yet older, he still meets up with Idra, enjoying tea and pastries. Someone suddenly calls to Bard from above, and he looks up. He sees Julren, who is still young, and wonders what he wants. Idra sits beside him, looking thoughtful. Young Julren sits high up in a tree, unable to get down from there. Idra reminds him that she had told him not to climb too high. Bard mentions that Idra had also been unable to reach the very top when she climbed, noting with a smile that the memories are still so clear. Idra tells him to stop bringing up the past like that. Bard apologizes with a laugh, and says that he will help Julren down quickly so they can continue their conversation later. He steps forward, lifts the boy down, and praises him for doing a good job while reminding him to be careful from then on. Julren calls out to Bard and says that he finally understands how to descend and will be able to reach even greater heights next time. Bard places a hand on his head and playfully tells Julren to stop being so cocky, declaring that it is time for punishment. He begins tickling Julren until the boy begs him to stop. Later, Bard carries the sleeping Julren on his back. Idra remarks that the boy played until he grew exhausted and fell asleep. Bard carries the sleeping Julren, wrapped in a cloak, on his back. He apologizes for interrupting their conversation, but Idra tells him not to concern himself over it. She notes that Julren seems very happy whenever he spends time with Bard. Idra says that she wants her child to experience all that the world has to offer and expresses her hope that one day Julren will get to see the world with Bard. Bard replies that if that time comes, Idra should come along as well. Idra reacts with delight and wholeheartedly agrees that she would love to go. She excitedly imagines traveling around the world on her own 2 feet someday, seeing sights she has never seen, meeting people Bard has yet to encounter, and eating various foods. Idra asks Bard to let her listen to his stories again. Back in the present, Bard smiles and agrees that she is right. He decides that he will write letters, sharing accounts of the taste of this big wajik, the food he will eat, and the scenery he will see. He is certain that there is still much delicious food he has yet to taste, and it seems that dying will not be such a simple matter after all. He sits by the fire beneath the stars and continues eating, savoring the delicious food. Chapter 4 opens with Bard walking with effort, breathing heavily as he moves along the rocky stream. He collapses, feeling his body grow cold and his head throb with fever. He loses consciousness and drifts into darkness, wondering if he has died, yet somehow he still feels warm. Not long after, he opens his eyes to find himself lying down. Stablos is beside him. Someone notices that he has regained consciousness, and an old woman suddenly leans over him, asking how he feels. Bard screams in shock. The old woman tells him that it is rude to react that way after seeing a person's face. Bard apologizes. She laughs and says that if he has enough strength to scream like that, he will probably be fine. She explains that she has already dried his clothes and tells him to get dressed. She also says that his horse is very smart because it pulled him right out of the river. When she found him, the horse was right beside him, keeping him warm. The old woman hands Bard a bowl of soup made from jerky and dried bread and tells him to eat it. Bard takes the soup and drinks it, feeling its warmth spread through him. He finds it delicious and is tantalized by its peculiar fragrance and taste. The old woman explains that she added medicinal grass as a substitute for condiments, giving the soup its strange taste. Bard wonders if it is something like the root of a tree. He had expected it to be difficult to chew, but it is surprisingly easy to break apart. The sweetness and subtle bitterness make it truly exquisite. Bard asks about the unfamiliar ingredient. The old woman directs his attention to what is right in front of him. Bard points out a plant and identifies it as a sherrycone. The old woman explains that it is called human handgrass and is considered ominous to see. She adds that sherrycone roots are easy to eat and nutritious. After peeling away the outer layer, they no longer smell like dirt, and they absorb heat well. There is no better ingredient for soup. Bard wonders if something so commonplace could be this delicious and decides that he must write about it in his letter to Lady Idra. The old woman then asks Bard if he happened to see a fruit about the size of a fist and covered in thorns during his travels. Bard remembers seeing the fruit before, and the woman realizes that he did. She asks if the food is tasty. Bard replies that the soup was truly delicious and that his weakened body is delighted. The old woman then asks if Bard wants to do something in exchange to show his gratitude. She asks if he would be so kind as to guide her to the fruit's location. Bard reacts in surprise and feels that this conversation is going to continue without end. Seeing his reaction, the old woman asks what is wrong and reminds him that it is merely a request from his savior. She playfully makes Bard feel guilty by pointing out that it was quite a burden for someone of her age to look after a man of such large build as him. Bard nervously replies that he has not said a word and that if it is such a small favor, he does not mind at all. The old woman laughs, tells Bard that he may still feel some discomfort, and advises him to rest well today. Bard lies down and thinks that it is unusual for someone to nurse an unconscious person in such a remote region, especially this deep in the mountains. In addition, he has been given some delicious bread soup, so he feels grateful. He then remembers that he has not yet asked for her name. The old woman smiles and tells him that she is called Witch. Bard repeats the name in surprise and wonders why she has such a terrible name. Witch laughs and explains that it is a long story and that they can talk about it some other time. Bard understands. The next day, they travel together and arrive at a vast valley stretching toward distant mountains. Bard stares at the view in amazement. He points out that even though so many of these plants are growing together, hardly any of them have opened yet, and remarks that they seem to have arrived at a good time. He picks out a fruit and explains that it is called Jellyadra. He also explains that the reason for his illness is that he woke up breathing in the pollen released when it opens, which clarifies that it is not real pollen as people know it, but actually the eggs of a small insect that lives as a parasite on the plant. Bard notes that Stablo seems perfectly fine, which explains that the eggs will only hatch once they are inside a human body. Bard reacts in shock, which then reveals that once the eggs hatch, no matter what one does, the victim is beyond saving. She explains that the truly troublesome part about Jellyadra is what happens after someone dies from the sickness. When the eggs enter the body, the host falls into a sleep that makes them appear dead. Inside the body, the eggs hatch, eat the body from within, grow, and lay even more eggs. Eventually, they gather in great numbers just beneath the skin of the corpse. The wind then carries them away to find new hosts. Once the process reaches this stage, nothing can stop it. The eggs spreading from the first host can wipe out an entire village, and then an entire nation. Bard wonders if any country has ever fallen to this, which laughs and says that there may have been. She then explains that if one pulverizes this Goliosk fruit and drinks it before the eggs hatch, the eggs will die and the disease will be cured. She tells Bard that they both have just drunk the medicine, so they will be safe for another 3 days. Bard understands, which adds that both fruits are very hard to find, but wherever Jellyadra grows rampantly, Goliosa grows as well. She recalls that when she first came to this mountain, she was very surprised to see so many Goliosa plants growing there, which explains that this is why they must take them all out by their roots and then burn everything. She considers it her responsibility. With this amount, she will have to prepare. She decides that they will burn them tomorrow and rest somewhere close by for today. After a while, which tells Bard to get a fire going. Bard looks at the small pile of fuel and wonders if the amount of firewood is not a bit insufficient, which assures him that it will be plenty. Bard reaches toward the wood, but before he can do anything, the fire suddenly bursts into flame on its own. Bard looks at Witch, who seems to be chanting. He stares at the fire and realizes that it appears to be lighting by itself. Witch smiles calmly beside him. Bard does not understand why she calls herself a witch, considering it a terrible way to refer to herself since he senses no darkness in her heart. Witch asks whether he really wants to hear the story, and Bard agrees. She begins by boasting that she was once known as a very beautiful witch and that the number of men who sought her out was as countless as the stars in the night sky. Bard reacts with embarrassment, and Witch quickly laughs, revealing that it was all just a joke. She explains that the story took place a very long time ago. At a village located deep in the mountains far from there, a mother and child passing by helped some sick villagers. The mother was a skilled herbalist. The villagers begged her to stay, and she agreed to take up residence in their village. The daughter inherited her mother's work and also became a herbalist in the village. She spent a relatively happy time there and eventually grew old. However, an epidemic struck. The villagers were weak, so they died one after another. The herbalist remained healthy thanks to the medicinal herbs she consumed every day. But the girl she cared for like a grandchild developed symptoms of the disease. The herbalist had enough medicine for only one person. It had been left behind by her dead mother, along with her promise. The herbalist broke that promise to save the girl. Thanks to the medicine, her granddaughter was saved, but the entire village began demanding the medicine as well. They refused to listen when she explained that she had no more. By then, the epidemic had calmed down, but everyone resented the herbalist. Even the child she had saved resented her because her parents had died from the disease. People began wondering why the herbalist had not fallen sick and how long the old hag had been alive. Someone remarked that she seemed to have already been an old hag when their grandfather was born. Eventually, they concluded that she was a witch. They went on to claim that the epidemic had been caused by the herbalist. She was then tied to a pillar and burned along with the entire cottage. Bard wonders what happened afterward. Witch smiles and suddenly finds the food delicious. She explains that she does not know exactly what happened, but the fact that she is here must mean that she was somehow saved. She hands Bard a bowl and encourages him to eat it. Bard takes the bowl and accepts it, which mentions that she tried changing the condiments this time to see what kind of taste it would have. Bard agrees that it is delicious. The next day, they stand looking out over the fields of Jellyadra and the great pile of uprooted plants waiting to be burned. which tells Bard that after the fire has been properly lit, he should go to the wetlands on the opposite side of the mountain stream, where his horse is waiting, because it will be that dangerous once the fire gets going. Bard understands and remembers her warning, which begins to chant, and the pile of plants bursts into a powerful flame. Once Bard sees that everything is all right, he begins walking toward the stream. As he walks away, he spots a creature looking at Witch. He reacts in shock when he recognizes it as a Rowagle, a shield frog. Bard realizes that this is not good. The shield frog lunges toward Witch. Bard takes the blow to protect her and falls to the ground. He thinks that he has hurt his chest and back with that last attack and that he will not be able to move very far. He looks toward Witch and realizes that the old figure who was chased out of the village is still trying to be an herbalist even now. He understands that she is trying to fulfill her responsibility, all for the sake of someone whom he has not seen yet. Bard feels the same. He abandoned his name, parted from his master, and wandered alone on a journey in order to find a place to die. But he is still a knight, and that remains unchanged. Bard decides that he should try to fulfill his responsibilities as well. He resolves not to let the creature disturb her and curses the shield frog. For now, he decides that he should venture into that thicket. The shield frog strikes, and Bard reacts in surprise at the creature's unexpected speed. He dodges the next attack and acknowledges that they are indeed fast. The Rowagle lunges again, forcing Bard back. He knows that its outer skin is slippery and strangely hard. On top of that outer skin, it also has an armor-like exoskeleton beneath, making it impossible for him to deliver an effective blow with a sword. As the Rowagle aims at him again, Bard decides what he must do. He swings his sword at the shield frog, but the creature catches him in its powerful jaws and pulls him inside. Bard groans in pain as its teeth grind against his armor. He thrusts the blade deeper into the creature's mouth. The shield frog swallows him halfway, its jaws clamping shut around his body. Bard drives the weapon farther from within, causing the creature to thrash violently. The shield frog struggles to shake Bard off, while Bard feels himself being pulled farther inside its body. He grits his teeth, holds tightly to his sword, and drives the blade deeper. The sword cuts through the creature from within. The shield frog smashes against the ground in agony. It thrashes wildly and crashes into the nearby trees. Bard is thrown clear and lands hard on the grass. The shield frog collapses, defeated. Bard lies on the ground, breathing heavily as he checks his body for injuries. He remains there while looking toward the fields and reacts in surprise. Far off, Witch has suddenly transformed into a young lady, standing surrounded by swirling light and falling petals. Her hair and garments flow as though caught in a strong wind. She raises her arms in a graceful motion, and Bard watches her in wonder from where he rests. Bard recalls seeing her tied to a pillar and burned along with the entire cottage. He realizes that the fact she is here means she was somehow saved. Witch stands tall with her arms raised, her long hair and clothes flowing around her as Bard closes his eyes. The fire spreads across the fields in a great wave of light. It burns for 3 days and 3 nights, reducing every Geliadra plant and its roots completely to ash. Afterward, Bard travels onward with the old lady for a time. During that period, she teaches him about different medicinal herbs and formulations, which explains that every magic invariably has a seed within it. Creating something from nothing is an act only God can perform. Even with the smallest of seeds, however, something can be made to grow large, or something small can be made to appear large, which explains that strength can start a fire, as can the knowledge of how to make a fire move in order to burn something. After understanding this, she only made a small request. She holds up a leaf and a twig and explains that fire, wind, and everything in between work in the same way. Witch laughs while Bard listens thoughtfully. At the end of the day, Bard admits that he does not understand it all that well. With proper knowledge and procedures, the ideal result can materialize exactly as it should. Bard thinks that he may have just witnessed something that changes what he knows from the very basics, and he decides to let the realization sink deep into his heart for now. 1 month later, they arrive at a place from which a village with people can be seen. Bard thanks Witch for her help and reflects that he has been in her care for quite a while. But when he looks at her, she is already gone. He looks around and wonders where she has gone. Bard decides that there is no point in thinking about it. He tells Stablos to go on ahead and feels glad that they will finally be able to sleep with a roof over their heads. Stablos responds in agreement. Bard adds that it would be great if they could arrive by the day after. They set out toward the village in the distance. Meanwhile, a group of officials and armored knights stands gathered in the village square, speaking with an elderly man who rubs his head with concern. 2 of the knights watch on, one with a steady gaze and the other appearing thoughtful. An official in formal dress places a hand over his chest and smiles as he listens. Hidden within the nearby trees, a mysterious man rests his chin in one hand and observes the scene. He wonders what they have there. Chapter 5 begins with Bard arriving at the village. He goes to a restaurant, where a female server tells him that he has good luck staying there on such a day. She offers him a cup, which Bard takes before asking what the drink is. She explains that the king has been crowned and seems surprised that he does not know. She praises the king as splendid for spending money on a village like theirs out in the boonies. She further explains that everyone present has been given one free cup of alcohol as a treat from His Highness King Windolent. Bard raises his cup in a toast to King Windolent and drinks. He is stunned to recognize that it is mead diluted with water, but brushes it off, since he cannot raise any complaints about something he received for free. He then expresses his desire to hear more about King Windolent and requests 1 glass of distilled alcohol. A man nearby explains that it appears Palsum Kingdom, located beyond the Alber River, has just recently reached the conclusion of a great war. Prince Windolent dealt the decisive blow through a sudden assault on the enemy's base, and the plan was apparently brilliant. The king then breathed his last, perhaps feeling at peace due to the triumphant return of the prince. The two sides had quarreled repeatedly over who should become the next king. The crown prince was the legitimate heir with the proper bloodline, while Prince Windolent's mother came from a background of low status. However, Windolent was older, immensely popular, and had accomplishments that were excellent compared to those of the crown prince. He had also received a great deal of support from the military. As a result, it was decided that Prince Windolent would become the next king. He was the hero this time around. The new king wanted to spread the joy of his coronation and his victory in battle, so he dispatched envoys throughout the land. They preached new government policies while parceling out charity. In such remote areas, 3 days would suffice for one to forget the name of the king. Bard understands this and regards it as an inexplicable yet praiseworthy act. Suddenly, a female knight enters and apologizes for disturbing everyone while they are relaxing. She asks whether there is a herbalist or anyone knowledgeable about illnesses present. Priest Todd, the special frontier province imperial envoy, has developed a sudden sickness. His legs and arms suddenly feel cold. He has been complaining constantly of intense headaches, and now, due to a high fever, he has lost consciousness. She seeks anyone who can help him. The people in the restaurant fall silent. Bard remarks that there probably are not any herbalists in a village out in such a remote place. He sets down his cup and thinks of the plants he has learned about before asking the knight to describe the symptoms in greater detail. The knight wonders whether he is a herbalist. Bard explains that he is not a herbalist, but if the disease is what he suspects it is, they must act immediately. Not long after, they arrive at the building where the sick man lies. Priest Todd burns with heat. Someone identifies the condition as overnight fever. Bard explains that it is a common illness well known in these frontier provinces. A high fever strikes all at once and usually lasts 1 or 2 days before disappearing on its own. Regardless, Bard is glad that it was not due to Geliadra. The male knight beside the priest asks whether the priest will be all right. Bard explains that the remedy is a tad dangerous. The fever is so high that the priest has lost consciousness, and at worst, if they leave it untreated, he may lose his life. Even with help, the patient may lose the use of a limb. The male knight asks whether there is nothing else they can do. Bard pauses before offering to prescribe some medicinal herbs if they follow his instructions correctly. After the treatment, it is important to give the patient plenty of water and keep the room warm. The male knight bows his head in thanks. The female knight approaches Bard and asks what she can do to help. Bard instructs her to bring a brazier and a bowl filled with water to heat the room. He tells her to bring the water to a boil, then let it cool until it is no longer boiling but still hot, and to continue doing this until she finishes counting to 500. The female knight agrees and hurries to prepare what is needed. Bard watches them and is impressed that they are willing to bow their heads and obey an old man like him without hesitation. He notes that the two are likely people of high status, yet they remain humble and do not let pride get in the way. Bard grinds the herbs into a fine powder, wiping sweat from his brow as he works. He carefully feeds the medicine to the sick man. The female knight brings the bowl of warm water as instructed. Dawn breaks outside the window and the patient rests more easily. The male knight bows deeply and expresses his true gratitude. He is afraid to think of what could have happened if Bard had not been there. Bard introduces himself as Bard Loen. The male knight realizes that he has not yet asked for Bard's name and wonders whether Bard happens to be Galdagash Gera, the people's knight. The female knight reacts in surprise at the name. Later on, Priest Todd sits at the dining table and thanks Bard Loen for saving his life. He explains that the feast is an expression of his gratitude and that they managed to obtain some rare ingredients. He adds that the lady who owns the restaurant, Gantz, knows the proper way to prepare the food, so everyone is looking forward to the meal. The dish known as jabo, also called Galdagastan night fish, is presented. It was caught in the Alber River and carefully prepared because it is poisonous if handled incorrectly. Priest Todd explains that this is the first time they have had the chance to eat it. He mentions that he has heard jabo is white meat, so he has prepared the finest white wine to accompany it. Bard objects and states that red wine should be served with jabo. Priest Todd wonders whether red wine is traditionally paired with white meat, and Bard confirms that it is. Priest Todd agrees, and they begin without further delay. Priest Todd and the two knights begin eating and are surprised by the taste. The female knight finds that a rich sweetness spreads from the tip of her tongue throughout her mouth. The meat melts and disintegrates with only a light bite. The male knight notices that the very slight difference in taste with each bite gently spreads, allowing him to understand why jabo is said to taste like the rainbow. Priest Todd observes that mixing the meat with the wine causes it to melt naturally. The soft texture and tingling sensation gently caress the throat as the meat makes its way down. Bard notes that it seems true that no fine wine can go on a journey. Priest Todd eagerly agrees, explaining that he had thought the 43-year wine would remain strong during the journey, but its taste has gained a strange bitterness. Bard explains that once one becomes accustomed to it, the bitterness becomes part of the wine's flavor, as the wine intensifies the umami of the jabo. Bard thinks to himself that Vari Todd does not seem to be an ordinary priest, no matter how he looks at him, and that he does not possess even a shred of the vulgar atmosphere surrounding some clergymen. Moreover, it goes without saying that the two knights are important people, yet the decorum they have maintained is exemplary. He also notes that the food before them was to a large extent prepared by the two knights. This party is not some random bunch of unlucky underlings put together by the new king and sent to tour the frontier provinces. They may have a different purpose. For now, Bard does not really care. Without overthinking things too much, he simply wants to relish the joy and good fortune of being able to share a drink with great people. Night falls and an owl watches from a tree outside. Later, in his room, Bard lies down with a heavy sound. He senses that something is wrong and feels his body going numb. He tries to stand but finds himself moving slowly, one small motion at a time. Bard takes an all-purpose medicinal herb, thinking that it should help. He struggles to stand and stumbles out of his room. Looking down the hallway, Bard sees the female knight lying on the floor. She groans weakly and appears barely able to move. Bard notices a rattling sound coming from the priest's room and realizes that an enemy is inside. He approaches the door and grips the hilt of his sword tightly. A man inside the room reacts in surprise as Bard bursts in. The man wonders why Bard can still move. Bard moves toward the window, and the man attempts to escape through it, only to get caught up in a bag. He falls back with a cry. Bard sees the priest lying unconscious in bed and reacts with shock. The man curses and struggles, but Bard grabs him. The two tumble to the floor together, and the man lands hard with a cry of pain. Bard notes that, as expected, he still cannot move properly. The man takes the opportunity to escape while Bard remains affected. He leaps out the window, leaving Bard startled. The man lands and runs across the ground. Bard follows but trips and falls. Eventually, the man stumbles and collapses on the slope. Bard catches up and holds a blade against him, with both of them breathing heavily. Bard stands over the man with his sword drawn beneath the bright moon. The man raises his hands in surrender, yet wears a broad smile. Bard is surprised that the man is smiling. He realizes that the man most likely took advantage of the commotion during the priest's illness and mixed gora sheera, a numbing drug, into the wine or something else. Bard recognizes that the man is a skillful lad. The man is identified as Julchaga, the thief who drugs all the residents of a house without killing anyone and steals items worth money. Julchaga is pleased to learn that he is really that famous. He explains that he has been following the envoy's party all the way from Palsam Kingdom, watching for his chance. He describes the two knights as walking hazards, though since it is his job, his pride took only a little knock. Outsmarting those two would have allowed him to live carefree for a whole month. Bard simply remarks that Julchaga certainly talks a lot. Julchaga also shares that he prayed to the god of trade and commerce, Ennu, promising to offer a bottle of the finest sake if his theft succeeded. It seems that his prayers were heard because the priest fell ill and then recovered. Julchaga had expected everyone to be asleep by dawn. Then he felt as though he heard words encouraging him to go now because it was his time to shine. Julchaga turns to Bard and asks who he is. Bard introduces himself, and Julchaga immediately screams in terror upon realizing that Bard is the one person he did not want to meet. After a while, the effects of the numbing drug wear off. As for Julchaga, a rich man in a nearby town had offered money for his capture. He is brought back to the village and handed over to the village head. The reward money is given to the village head with instructions to distribute it to the villagers as inconvenience money. The next day, Bard is about to continue his journey. Priest Todd explains that they were saved by Bard twice. He shares that they are heading to Dalba province and asks whether Bard would like to accompany them for a while, having heard that Bard has retired and is now on an aimless journey. Bard quickly apologizes and makes it clear that he wants to go to Rince, refusing to accompany them. Priest Todd regards this as a shame. He then offers Bard a bottle of distilled liquor as a token of gratitude, noting that it has a remarkable taste and that its flavor will not change during travel. Thus, Bard parts with the envoy and his party. However, he has no clue that the journey of that group will become greatly connected with the fate of Idra and her son. He walks forward across the open land beside his horse, while the envoy's wagons travel in the distance behind him. Chapter 6 opens in the city of Rint. A great ship rests at the harbor while workers load and unload cargo amid a bustling crowd. Bard remarks on the sheer number of people, and the word people echoes through the busy street. He looks out over the bay and is delighted that this is the city of Rint. He notes that one cannot see the opposite side of the Alba River from here. Bard recalls that Idra has always written about the city of Rint in her letters and feels that he must deliver a reply. He sees food being sold and purchases one. The vendor thanks him for the purchase. Bard decides that he must investigate this place carefully. He savors the slight tingle of the sweet and spicy sauce that stimulates his appetite. On top of that, the texture breaks apart softly on his tongue. He notices that the meat was first minced and then molded into a sphere and remarks that this must take a great deal of time and effort. He identifies the main ingredient as chicken, with other meats mixed in, including finely diced roas or paris. The seasoning conceals their scent while enhancing the flavor. As Bard enjoys his food, people nearby make fun of someone for being sold again. Some wonder what the man is doing. The man explains that he is being sold for 1 million gale. The people laugh and call it a joke, saying that it would be great if a king walked through there. Bard realizes that this is slave trading and wonders whether they are even willing to sell. He looks over and is stunned to see Ven Ural sitting with a sign stating that he is selling himself. Bard looks on with a weary expression. A moment later, the two have time to talk to each other. Ven greets Bard and acknowledges that they have met again. Bard asks what Ven is doing. Ven explains that after Bard killed Yotish, he dragged Yotish's corpse back to Caldus's place. He followed the contract and instructions, so he had every right to his reward, even though Yotish ignored his warnings and preparations only to get himself killed. However, Caldus had no reason to pay a bodyguard who failed to protect his nephew. He even shouted at Ven to bring back Bard's head. Ven explains that he told Caldus he would only accept a new contract if he was paid for the previous one first, but Caldus refused to give him anything. Ven adds that he needs money now, and since his current job pays only upon completion, he decided to sell himself. Bard feels helpless for Venerable. He notes that a swordsman as talented as the Red Crow could simply go to the city lord, demonstrate his skill, and get hired for considerable compensation. Bard knows that a skilled swordsman has many avenues to earn gale, but Ven has wrapped his sword in a straw mat and kept it hidden. Bard wonders whether this is a matter of pride or religion. He hands a pouch to Ven and asks whether it will be enough for Ven's needs. Ven looks at the amount and notes that 93,000 gale does not even reach a tenth of his price. He recognizes that the money comes from none other than Sir Bard Loen, the people's knight, and states that he shall yield to Bard. Ven apologizes for his presumptuousness but asks Bard to give him some of his time. Bard tells Ven that he did not purchase him and that Ven is free to do as he likes. Ven inquires where Bard is going next. Bard replies that he has no plans and might head north or somewhere else. Ven says that he will return to Bard once he finishes his business, which should take at least 2 months and 6 at most. Ven walks away and Bard watches him go, remarking that Ven is a strange man as always. His horse neighs and Bard prepares to set off. He then returns to the food stalls and purchases food that entices him. Once satisfied, he wonders what he will do next when a man calls out to him. The man asks whether he came from Pakura. The scene shifts to a big house perched on a cliff. The man announces their arrival. Inside, Jolrin greets Bard and remarks that he is so late that he nearly died waiting. Bard is surprised that Jolrin is really there. Simon Epibelez introduces himself, explaining that they are meeting for the first time and that it is a great honor to meet Bard. Bard remarks that the Earl of Rintz has biceps like a warrior. Simon expresses his desire to offer Bard a drink later. When looking for a town with many delicious things, Rintz comes to mind. Jolrin explains that he predicted Bard would come to this port. He described Bard's appearance to the Earl's servant and had the servant look around the food stalls every day. Bard reacts flusteredly at the implication that there is nothing but food on his mind. Jolrin laughs and points out that this must be why Bard is standing before him now. Jolrin then becomes serious and calls out to Bard before pausing. He has something important to tell him. His mother, Idra, has passed away. Bard stiffens. Jolrin shares that his mother once said the garden was her favorite place to be on pleasant days. While the maid was preparing tea, Idra breathed her last. She went in peace with a happy look upon her face. Bard realizes that he is too late. Lord Vura, the previous province head of Pakura and also Idra's elder brother, passed away 2 years ago. From that moment on, Bard began to feel his age. Around the same time, Idra's health deteriorated, and she was mostly confined to her bedroom. Bard knew she did not have much time left, but in the end, she passed away before he could even write his first letter. She had once said that someday she would like to see the land beyond the Alba River. Bard looks out over the water with a heavy expression of grief. He then apologizes for keeping Julren waiting and for making him go out of his way, noting that Julren must have been there quite a while because of him. Julren assures Bard that it was not a problem. Setting aside Bard's matter, he has been selling fur and silver and has deepened his friendly relationship with the Earl. It is not something Bard should be concerned about. Julren then hands Bard an envelope. It contains a letter written by his mother and addressed to Bard. In the next second, a man appears. He laughs and remarks that it was just as Oswald said before greeting Bard. He demands the letter, certain that Bard also possesses something Princess Idra left in his care. Bard recognizes the man as Gyenzura Payne, the younger brother of Caldus. Simon demands to know the meaning of this and calls out Oswald's name. Oswald stands silently behind Gyenzura. Oswald then explains that business means never letting go of an opportunity and that he is simply doing as Simon taught him. Currently, only those who serve him remain at the residence, so he intends to force Simon to retire from this world. Bard asks who Oswald is. Simon identifies him as Oswald, his adopted child. Bard realizes Oswald's intention. By joining forces with Coimbra, Oswald plans to take the lead of his own family. To succeed, they must first eliminate the obstacles standing in the way of both sides. Julren points out that Oswald cannot become a knight if he kills the Earl who is his own father. In that scenario, Oswald will not be able to inherit the social rank. The Earl's allies will not obey him either. Julren also points out that their trade partner, the Palsum Kingdom, would not look favorably on such actions. Oswald thanks Julren for his concern but explains that he has already considered all the issues. Lord Gyenzura Payne will provide the investments, and Oswald cares nothing for his father's reputation. What he wants is the key to the box his father always keeps close. Once he has the key, he will take the documents inside and become free to trade with the Palsum Kingdom. Oswald declares that he will have a relationship with the lord of a frontier province and that the Coimbra family will take care of everything. All those loud and annoying executives and the like will serve as bait for the Obar fish. Bard, Julren, and Simon stiffen. Bard realizes that as long as there are no witnesses, anything can happen. Soldiers are most likely already being dispatched to the locations of the Earl's biological son and relative. For starters, they are trapped in this place, as their enemies are blocking the exit, while behind them is the balcony sitting on top of a rocky cliff. Bard then asks Gyenzura what happened with the Red Crow. Gyenzura angrily explains that they threw away a useless man who could not even protect his son and demanded a reward on top of that. The man also killed the 2 assassins they sent to tail him. Gyenzura declares that he never wants to see that man's face again. Bard regards Gyenzura as an unbounded idiot. Gyenzura insists that Bard is mistaken, as Bard is the ultimate idiot for walking straight into a death trap. He declares that this is revenge for his son and orders Bard to die. Soldiers move in to surround them. Julren calls out to Bard, but Bard orders him to stay back. Julren looks toward Bard and notes that it has been quite some time since he last saw Bard acting so seriously. He understands. Bard thinks to himself that Gyenzura must be enjoying the situation. They are unarmed and 14 soldiers stand against just the 3 of them. Bard resolves to give Gyenzura his life, but in exchange, he will butcher everyone else. He vows that he will not let anyone touch a single hair on Julren. Chapter 7 continues with Gyenzura shouting for them to get Bard. Soldiers surge forward with spears aimed at him. Bard stands his ground and urges them all to come at him. He notices that one soldier's breathing is off, moves past the spear, and strikes. He calls out complete disarray as he fights through the attackers. A soldier stands ready with a spear in hand, reacting in surprise as Bard moves swiftly toward him. Bard seizes the spear, twists it from the soldier's grip, and uses it to strike another attacker. He deflects incoming blows and presses forward through the crowd. One soldier cries out in pain as Bard lands a solid hit, while others stagger back in shock. Bard continues to fight, pushing each enemy aside as he advances. Bard hurls one soldier through the air toward the balcony railing. He wields a spear in each hand, striking out on both sides as enemies close in. A soldier reacts in shock as Bard delivers a sharp blow, sending another crashing to the floor. He sweeps a leg to knock an attacker off balance and drives him down. When a soldier tries to grab his weapon, Bard twists free and counters with a forceful strike. He presses steadily forward, overcoming every attempt to surround him. Bard calls out and tosses a spear toward Julren, who catches it and thanks him. Bard then asks whether it is all right for him to kill Oswald, and Simon gives his permission. Oswald swallows hard and orders his men to kill Bard. Bard moves forward swiftly as one soldier cries out in alarm. Bard slides across the floor, sweeping one soldier aside and breaking through the group surrounding him. More soldiers step forward to strike, but Bard dodges the blows and presses onward. More soldiers rush in from all directions, yet Bard meets every attack with a spear and shield, driving his opponents back. He deflects a heavy strike and continues fighting undaunted. Seeing this, Oswald tries to flee together with a soldier. Bard catches up to them and strikes both with a spear. Oswald falls and dies. Gyenzura watches everything happen. Bard turns to Gyenzura, remarking that he is so close and that only morons would attack in such a way. Bard then attacks Gyenzura, but the two soldiers protect him. Bard grips their hands tightly. With a low grunt, he lifts the two soldiers and sends them crashing aside. Gyenzura staggers back, and Bard reacts in surprise when he sees the sword. He realizes that it is the very sword he kicked away earlier and remarks on his bad luck. Gyenzura demands to know where the double spiral is and mentions something called the seal. Bard asks what the seal is and what the spiral means. Gyenzura repeats the words and urges Bard to tell him. Bard stands alone amid the fallen soldiers, deep in thought. He looks at the fallen guards and realizes that he has certainly hampered their fighting spirit. A remaining soldier stands trembling against the wall, too afraid to step forward. Suddenly, the soldier rushes toward Julren, shocking Bard, who wonders if the soldier has lost his mind. At this pace, the soldier will probably jump right off the cliff. Julren tries to stop him, but the soldier runs past him, causing Julren to stumble. It turns out that the soldier is aiming for the letter of Idra that Julren has. The soldier reveals his face, and Bard is surprised to see that it is Julchaga. Bard recalls that Julchaga was supposed to be arrested. When Julchaga was being judged, Gyenzura and his group helped him get out, but in exchange for saving his life, he had to give them something of equal value. Julchaga goes straight down to the cliff, playfully waves his hand and apologizes. Simon looks over the edge and sees the rocks far below. He remarks that Julchaga is like Mashira, a monkey. He adds that Julchaga possesses some insane strength and thinks that he must have been very determined to stand there and then take that fall. Julren then speaks in a saying that when 100 sheep gather, the tiger is smart enough not to fight. Bard wonders why Julren is acting so boastful, while Simon laughs and agrees that Julren is right. The Earl's biological son, family, and retainers had also been marked for assassins and went into hiding once they learned that the plan had failed, while others were caught. Consequently, the assassination attempt was a complete failure. Bard wonders exactly what Gyenzura had been going on about and where the seal is, since Julren has no idea at all. The next day, Julren smiles, remarking that it has been a long time since he last saw Bard in action and that he now has a good story to take back home. Julren apologizes to Bard about the letter, and Bard tells him that it is all right and that he does not mind. As a result of his lack of foresight and joining the fight, Bard's body aches all over, leaving him unable even to get up. Bard lies in bed, lamenting that he was not able to see Julren off either. Julren tells him not to try so hard and to simply rest. He explains that Bard's complaints make it seem that even the tiger cannot win against age. 3 days pass. Bard rides Stablos as they walk around the city. Since he slept the whole time, he did not get to walk around or eat. He asks his horse, Stablos, whether she is not tired, and Stablos responds with sounds. Bard wonders how old Stablos is, recalling that he received her when she was 2 years old as a gift from Lady Idra when she got married. He tells Stablos that he is already 31 and has lived a long life. He admits that, in the end, he never got to ask the meaning of her name. When Bard received Stablos, Lady Idra had told him that the old meaning of her name was a secret, which meant that there must be some special significance behind it. However, he never brought up the question again, even though they had spent so much time together. Bard walks beside Stablos across the shoreline and wonders since when they had begun coming to the sunny spot in the garden. He recalls that it must have been around the time he offered his sword to Patraposa, his guardian deity. He remembers the promise he made then, to always protect Lady Idra and Julren. Bard remembers Alicia, who sits in a peaceful garden pouring tea while someone sprinkles grains nearby. She smiles gently, her expression warm and full of affection. Bard stands looking out over the water as the sun begins to set. He tells Stablos that the sun is already sinking into the river and notices that a cold wind is starting to blow, causing him to shiver at the feeling. Bard suggests that they return to their beds. As they walk along the shore, Bard spots a figure flying high above and recognizes it as an Ain't Nag, a flying dragon. He wonders whether flying dragons ever fight amongst themselves. Bard looks toward the bustling town below and admits that he would have loved to write Lady Idra a letter at least once. He and Stablos continue walking along the docks as the day comes to an end. Chapter 8 begins with Bard looking out over the busy riverside market, glad to finally see food stalls. He decides that it is time to eat until he drops. The food at the Earl's Manor had been splendid, but food sold at stalls offered a different kind of enjoyment. Someone taps him on the shoulder, and Bard turns around in surprise. Julchaga greets him and notes that he looks well before asking Bard to treat him to something to eat. Bard remains silent and simply stares at him. Julchaga calls for Bard to come along, and Bard follows him toward the stalls. Julchaga points out a dish called Taiwadal and remarks that it looks tasty. Bard and Julchaga sit by the riverbank and eat their food. Julchaga remarks that it is hot but also very tasty. Bard agrees that it is delicious. The soft, sticky wheat flour exterior is seasoned with just the right amount of salt, and Bard finds the combination delicious. The filling is even more interesting. The gelnik is spiced and the tentacles are sweetened, while the cuts of white fish meat are seasoned with miso and the muscles are left unseasoned. All the flavors blend perfectly, with every bite bringing a new and different taste. Julchaga cheerfully announces that he will go buy some sweet sake and asks Bard for some money. Bard hands over the coins and tells him to be careful on his way. Julchaga runs off and promises to be back soon. He returns quickly, sets a drink down, and offers Bard another item as well. Bard asks what it is. Julchaga explains that potatoes and other vegetables should be boiled and mashed together, after which the mixture is cut into thin strips, fried quickly, and sprinkled with salt. Bard tastes it and agrees that it is really good. Julchaga then mentions that Bard definitely did not expect him to jump off the cliff. Bard replies that he did not. Julchaga teases him about thinking it looked cool when Julchaga hopped down the rocks, and Bard admits that he did. Julchaga exclaims that he is a genius and laughs, feeling too complimented and flattered. Julchaga admits that he was scared the whole time, yet he did it anyway with his life on the line. At every moment, he thought he might die, that he would not be able to do it, and that it might be impossible. Still, he kept telling himself that he would be able to do it. In the end, he managed to make it work out and considers himself awesome. Bard agrees that a knight's fight is similar in that way. Julchaga feels that his own deeds are much the same as what knights do. He feels nice and warm and wonders whether there is some secret ingredient at work, since his body is warming up nicely. Suddenly, they hear a child screaming. They look around and see a child fall from the bridge above. Afterwards, they went to Simon's residence. Inside, a man opened the door and looked at them in surprise. Bard asked whether they might borrow a change of clothes. Simon was amazed that they had jumped into the river to save the child. Julchaga explained that he had been the only one who jumped in. Simon wondered why both of them were drenched, and Julchaga explained that he had managed to reach the child and float with him, but the child struggled so much that he could not move. Just then, a boat approached and Julchaga feared they were done for. While he was still thinking about that, Bard reached down and grabbed a tree to push the boat away. Simon reacted in disbelief that someone could stop a boat with a tree, since no one could normally uproot something that large. Julchaga confirmed that it had happened. During the incident, Bard had repeated Julchaga's own reasoning that when he thought he would not be able to do something but believed he could, and then actually succeeded, he considered himself awesome. Hearing this, Julchaga laughed and hugged Bard, thanking him. Bard complained that he was cold. Simon laughed when he heard this. Bard continued complaining to Julchaga about what he would do if he caught a cold. Julchaga chuckled and apologized. Then a knock sounded at the door. Simon commanded the person to enter. The maid entered holding a tray covered by a cloth. Simon addressed Bard as he presented the tray, explaining that it was thanks to Bard that they had been able to survive the recent attack without harm. He stated that the Epibales family would always remember what Bard had done and that their doors would always be open to him. Simon lifted the cloth and revealed gold coins. He explained that they were a small token of his gratitude and pleaded with Bard to accept them. Julchaga was amazed to see at least 100 great gold coins. Bard pointed out that, first of all, the attack had been carried out with him as the intended target, and the water poured onto him had merely splashed onto Simon. Because of that, Bard could not accept any gratitude in this situation. Julchaga wondered whether it would be alright for him to take the gold instead, and Bard told him to shut up for just a bit since Julchaga had been on the attacker's side. Simon laughed and remarked that Julchaga was an interesting kid. Simon then turned to Bard and revealed that he had been able to procure some information while interrogating the remnants of the attack. Oswald had always been planning a takeover of the house by colluding with the Coendra. Simon added that they would all have perished if it had not been for Bard's presence, and that Bard was the reason they still had their lives. Bard offered to assume that he had accepted the reward and that he would eventually hand it over to the Tertia family. Simon noted that Bard had no greed and cared for his master's family, but wondered what others would think if Bard handed the money over to Tertia. Even if Bard kept it a secret, matters like these would eventually crawl back to the surface. Simon added that a businessman would never hand out a large amount of money without gaining something in return. He also pointed out that the Tertia family was already wealthy enough. Simon told Bard that he would come up with a different way to reward the Tertia family and implored him to at least accept the gold. Julchaga urged Bard to be honest and accept it as well, and Simon gladly agreed with him. Bard then picked up one coin and agreed to take just that much for now, with the intention of taking the rest whenever he needed it. Simon said that was perfectly fine. He then mentioned that, in that event, it might not be Bard who personally came to collect the remaining gold, but perhaps a representative. He suggested that it would be good to decide on a way to affirm that the representative had indeed been sent by Bard. Bard agreed and asked whether he could borrow some paper and ink. Using the ink, Bard placed a fingerprint on the paper. Simon looked at the mark and asked what it was. Bard explained that the outline of one's finger was different from person to person. Bard proceeds to explain that this is called a fingerprint, widely used in the countries toward the center of the continent as an alternative to a seal. Since no two fingerprints look alike, he considers it the best method. He tells Simon that if someone approaches him with a paper like this, he should hand over the coins to that person. Simon is surprised. Others step forward to press their fingers onto the paper, each taking their turn. Simon notes that every person's print is different and finds it interesting. Julchaga remarks that Bard is a genius. Bard recalls that he had also heard about fingerprints from Lady Idra in the garden. He suddenly realizes that the double whirlpool Gyenzura mentioned might be referring to a fingerprint. Simon concludes that it means someone has a fingerprint that looks like two whirlpools. Bard adds that they could be looking for an oath or a certificate onto which that finger was pressed. He guesses that Gyenzura probably did not know what the fingerprint was. Simon then concludes that someone who is not from the Coendra family took the fingerprint as a clue and is searching for either a person or some sort of document, while the Coendra family wants to be ready for that. The three of them become silent. Then Bard and Simon turn their attention to Julchaga, surprising him. Both ask Julchaga what he thinks and whether he knows something about all this. Julchaga explains that he was simply repaying the debt he had incurred and that he had been told to fetch the letter and the seal. Bard asks Julchaga why the Coendra family wants the letter in the first place and wonders where they got the idea about the whirlpool and the seal. Julchaga explains that Gyenzura spoke to an old man called Vakra, who told him not to concern himself with the matter. Vakra also said that envoys from the Marquis of Gadusha province could be identified thanks to the double whirlpool and the seal. Bard realizes that the Marquis of Gadusha province and Vakra Meganon are now involved as well. He asks whether Julchaga handed the princess's letter over to Vakra, and Julchaga confirms that he did. Julchaga apologizes to Bard and explains that the letter was from the Princess of Tertia and was addressed to Bard. Bard is not worried about the letter. He adds that Idra is not the kind of person who would send something unless it was truly important. Julchaga shares that Vakra read the letter and then shouted angrily that there was not a single word of importance written down anywhere. Julchaga had told Vakra that Vakra had instructed him to steal the letter, so he had done exactly that, and that this was exactly what he had thought as well, though he had kept that thought to himself. Bard considers that a smart decision. However, Bard wonders why they would want a letter that Idra wrote and how the spirals and the seal are related to one another. Julchaga continues to explain that it seems even old man Vakra does not know all that well, so he went to complain to Gyenzura and learned that it was time to tell him the details of the disturbance. Gyenzura had responded that there must be a clue in the letter, but they would have to wait until they got the seal. He had also stated that Bard surely knew about the whirlpool and the seal. Julchaga explains that the letter was filled with things he did not really understand. Simon tells Julchaga that if he came there to search for the seal, he had wasted his effort, because the seal was not there and Bard did not have even a hint of it either. Julchaga quickly corrects him and explains that this is not the case. He had settled his debt simply by stealing and handing over the letter. He had already parted ways with Vakra and adds that Vakra did not seem like someone who was fun to be around anyway. Simon asks Julchaga why he came back to this town. He points out that Julchaga is one of those charged with an assassination attempt on the Earl of Rince and 2 knights of the Tertia family. Even his posters are in circulation, and if found, Julchaga is as good as dead. Julchaga asks him not to spout such serious things. He explains that he could not leave Rince without trying the delicious food stalls and did not want to leave for anywhere else without doing that. Simon laughs and finds Julchaga an interesting kid, seeing that the stalls there are something worth staking his life on. Julchaga agrees that they are worth risking one's life for. Julchaga admits that he has no money. He had been thinking about doing a job somewhere when he saw Bard, who stood out because his head was literally above the crowd. Julchaga then turns to Bard and explains that he has nothing to repay him with for the meal. He asks Bard whether there is anything he would like to request from Julchaga instead. Bard asks whether Vakra returned to Dalba province, and Julchaga says no. He explains that Vakra said they would catch up to the envoy and then guide them to a different residence on the banks of a lake. A maid hands him a wet towel and Julchaga thanks her. Bard begins to piece together the situation. Kaluz Coendra has become the new great lord of the eastern provinces. It is normal for a new ruler to dispatch representatives to establish authority, but it is strange that an imperial envoy would suddenly be sent to such a remote area. Something out there is being pursued fervently by Kaldus, and it may relate to the sign of the double spirals or whatever mark that is. The letter could reveal the identity of the person involved, but no one yet knows who or what that might be. Kaldus seems certain that the answer he seeks is written inside that letter. Bard realizes that this means Lady Idra is caught up in the entire affair as well. Bard asks Julchaga whether they could reach the lakeside residence and contact the envoy without being spotted by the guards at the manor. Julchaga gives a confident smile and confirms that they can. Bard nods in understanding. Chapter 9 begins with Bard and Julchaga traveling together. Bard rides his horse, Stablos, while Julchaga keeps pace beside him on foot. They consider stopping at a nearby village, despite having left Rince in a hurry. An irregular dispatch of an imperial envoy to the frontier provinces has taken place, and the Coendra family is eagerly searching for the double whirlpool. Bard believes that all of these events are connected to Lady Idra. For the time being, he intends to meet the envoy and discuss the matter, which is why he departed from Rince so urgently. However, before meeting the envoy, there is something else he needs to confirm in the village. Julchaga remains beside Bard despite refusing to ride a horse. Although he appreciates Bard's concern for him, he believes that becoming accustomed to riding would be detrimental to his trade. Bard finds it remarkable that Julchaga can maintain the pace of a horse while traveling entirely on foot. As the day grows late, Bard decides that they should stop and rest for the night. He already has a place in mind. The two eventually arrive at a village, where Bard approaches the village head and apologizes for their sudden intrusion. The village head receives them warmly, considering their arrival a great honor. The village woman shares the same sentiment and prepares food for the travelers, placing it before them in the hope that it will suit their taste. Among the food is jai, which immediately catches Julchaga's attention. He is delighted by it and eagerly begins eating. Bard expresses his gratitude for the generous meal and is struck by the amount of food that has been prepared for them. He learns that the villagers have been drying the jai in preparation for winter and have taken some of their precious supply out to share with their guests. In the harsh frontier provinces, such resources are essential for surviving the severe winters, making the villagers' generosity all the more meaningful to Bard. They begin eating together. Julchaga thoroughly enjoys the jai, while Bard takes the time to appreciate its texture and flavor. The fruit has a satisfying crunch, followed by savory juices that spread through his mouth, while a light coating of salt lingers in his throat. Bard finds the combination surprisingly pleasant and wonders how the fruit has become so sweet. The village woman explains that she had added a considerable amount of salt before boiling it. Bard finds it remarkable that such a simple method could cause the sweetness of the jai to increase so dramatically. Julchaga continues to enjoy the meal in his own manner. Rather than plucking and eating each kernel individually, as some people do, he prefers to bite into the entire piece at once. His method proves effective, as not a single kernel remains when he finishes. Bard notices this and acknowledges how thoroughly Julchaga has eaten. Julchaga responds with obvious satisfaction at the taste. Bard attributes much of the meal's quality to the village woman, but she insists that she has done nothing special and merely boiled the jai. Bard reflects on how the simpler a dish is, the more clearly a person's skill can be revealed through its preparation. The peaceful meal is suddenly interrupted when Bard experiences a sharp pain in his shoulder. Julchaga notices his discomfort and becomes concerned. Bard dismisses it as nothing serious, explaining that his shoulder occasionally troubles him and quietly acknowledging that age is something even he cannot overcome. Julchaga then notices a curved blade nearby and becomes interested in it. The weapon is small and elegantly shaped, catching his attention immediately. Bard picks up the curved blade and reveals that it has been his favorite for a long time. Despite Julchaga's interest, Bard makes it clear that the weapon is not something he intends to give away. Julchaga reacts by viewing Bard's unwillingness to part with the blade as an act of stinginess, while Bard remains firmly attached to his treasured weapon. The following day, Bard visited the house where Idra's former maid lived. The woman was startled by his unexpected arrival, but her surprise quickly gave way to warmth as she welcomed him into her home and prepared tea for her old acquaintance. Nearly 20 years had passed since she had stopped serving as Lady Idra's maid. The passage of so much time made Bard reflect on how long it had truly been since those days. Bard then delivered the news that Lady Idra had passed away only a few days earlier. The news struck the woman deeply. The plate she had been holding slipped from her hands and fell to the floor. For a while, she struggled to compose herself before finally recovering enough to apologize for allowing Bard to witness such a vulnerable moment. She could not understand why someone as noble and gentle as Lady Idra had been taken from the world, especially when Idra had been younger than herself. Memories of their time together returned vividly. She remembered how, years ago, she had been uncertain about returning to the village because her mother had fallen ill. At the time, Lady Idra had encouraged her to go back and support her family, reminding her to treasure those who mattered to her. To the former maid, Idra had always been like a light. She could still remember the days when the young Lady Idra had constantly attempted to escape her sewing lessons. Those memories felt so recent that it seemed as though they had happened only yesterday. Bard remembered those troublesome days as well, particularly because he had been responsible for teaching Idra how to sneak away and play in the forest instead of attending her lessons. The memory brought amusement to both of them, and they shared a brief laugh over the distant past. Yet beneath their smiles was the realization that many years had passed since those carefree days. Bard had not come merely to reminisce. He had a question concerning the princess, and he believed the former maid might be the only person capable of providing the answer. For a year and a half, Lady Idra had stayed at another residence belonging to the Coendra family. Bard had always wondered what had truly happened during that period. Idra herself had remained completely silent about it, and because she had clearly chosen not to speak, Bard had never pressed her for an explanation. Now, however, he could no longer leave the matter unanswered. The mystery centered on Idra's divorce while she was carrying a son and the subsequent decision to send both her and her child back to the Terja family. Even after all those years, the Coendra family continued to keep a close watch on the princess. Bard suspected that the missing year and a half might contain the key to understanding everything. The former maid hesitated before finally deciding to reveal what she knew. Lady Idra had trusted her deeply, and because of that trust, she had kept the truth sealed within herself for all those years. Yet Bard was someone she could trust as well, and she was finally willing to tell him what had truly happened at the lakeside manor. After learning the truth, Bard left the house without delay. The information he had received made the situation far more urgent. He needed to meet the Imperial envoy immediately. At that moment, he believed that he was the person best positioned to accomplish the task before him. His instincts had been correct all along, and he could not shake the feeling that Lady Idra herself had been guiding him toward the truth. Outside the village, Julchaga eventually caught up with him. The village was small enough that following Bard's direction had been relatively easy, but Julchaga had not come merely to find him. He had heard the sound of numerous horses approaching. The riders appeared to be heading toward the village head's residence, and something about their arrival gave Julchaga an ominous feeling. Inside the village head's house, an unfamiliar man with long dark hair sat casually with his feet resting on the table. Several armored soldiers surrounded the room, creating an oppressive atmosphere. The village head and his wife stood nearby, watching the situation with visible unease. The dark-haired man eventually raised one hand, giving his soldiers a signal. One of the soldiers then delivered the Coendra family's demands. Beginning that year, the amount of money the village was required to provide to the Coendra family would be increased to 5 times the amount previously given to the Terja family. The villagers would also no longer be required to pay taxes to the Terja family. The sudden demand placed the village head in an impossible position. The village had been under the protection of the Terja family since ancient times, and the proposed change was so abrupt that he could not easily accept it. Despite the soldiers' pressure, the village head remained hesitant. The traditions and loyalties that had governed the village for generations could not simply be discarded overnight, and the arrival of the Coendra family's representatives threatened to overturn the established order. The soldier ultimately concluded that the village head would not obey. The village head remained firm, insisting that he could not possibly accept the Coendra family's demands. The soldier moved to strike him. Before the blow could land, however, something crashed through the wall and sent the soldier flying backward. The sudden interruption stunned everyone in the room. The long-haired man immediately reprimanded the soldier for attempting to kill the village chief. Killing the village head would have jeopardized their entire plan, since he was responsible for collecting taxes and communicating orders to the rest of the village. The man then ordered his soldiers to avoid killing the young men and women of the village. The soldier made one final attempt to obtain the village head's compliance, but the village head continued to refuse. Having exhausted his patience, the soldier decided that he had no other choice. He stepped forward and seized the village head's wife. The woman cried out in alarm, while the village head desperately questioned the soldier's actions. The soldier intended to demonstrate the consequences of resisting the Coendra family and began drawing his sword. Terrified, the woman begged them to stop and desperately called for Sir Bard to help her. The moment the long-haired man heard Bard's name, his expression changed. His attention immediately shifted toward the woman as he demanded to know why Bard's name had been mentioned. The frightened woman could do nothing but plead for mercy and forgiveness. Then someone entered the house. The long-haired man turned toward the doorway and saw Bard standing there. The two men met each other's gaze. Recognition quickly spread across the long-haired man's face, followed by a burst of laughter. He had apparently been waiting for the day he would meet Bard again. He remembered that Bard had once gone traveling without his permission and instinctively placed a hand over his chest. Beneath his hand was a scar. It was the same scar Bard had inflicted upon him years ago when he had cut him down on the battlefield. The memory caused the man's expression to darken, and his hand tightened into a fist as his hatred toward Bard resurfaced. Bard offered no response. Instead, he simply looked at the man before turning and walking out of the house. The man's reaction made his intentions clear. He immediately followed Bard outside. Surrounded by his soldiers, the man stepped into the open area outside the village head's house. Bard stood at a distance and watched him approach. Several soldiers attempted to persuade their leader to put on armor or at least cover his exposed chest, but he refused. Bard recognized him. The man was Jog Ward, the illegitimate son of Kaldis, the current head of the Coendra family. Jog had also risen to become the head of one of the Coendra branch families. Bard remembered their first encounters on the battlefield. The first time Bard had fought Jog, the young man had been only 16 years old. They had clashed twice during that period. Even then, Jog possessed considerable ambition, but his skills were still immature and unrefined. Bard had felt reluctant to kill someone so young, so instead of finishing him, he had kicked Jog from his horse and allowed him to escape. Their second encounter occurred when Jog was 22. By then, the young warrior had undergone tremendous growth. His appearance and presence had changed so much that Bard had initially been unable to recognize him. Jog had become powerful enough to defeat the knights of Tertia one after another. During their confrontation, Bard had blocked Jog's attack with his shield before striking back and cutting across the left side of Jog's chest. Even then, Bard had recognized the terrifying potential within him. He had believed that if Jog were given a few more years to develop, there might be no one capable of stopping his sword. Those years had now passed. Bard was once again standing face to face with Jog. Jog was approximately 26 years old by then, and the strength he had displayed in the past had undoubtedly grown even further. Bard knew that confronting a greatsword wielder of Jog's caliber without proper equipment would be extremely dangerous. His body was already beginning to remind him of his age, and his injured shoulder was another disadvantage. Despite that, Bard could not simply stand by and watch the village head and his wife be harmed. He understood that he might die in the confrontation. Yet retreating was not an option. Lady Idra's guidance had led him to this place, and Bard refused to let that guidance go to waste. The truth surrounding the lakeside manor, Julren, and the future of the Tertia family were all at stake. With those thoughts in mind, Bard prepared himself for the coming battle. He would have to find a way to overcome Jog, regardless of the danger. Bard and Jog faced each other. Jog stood before Bard with his greatsword drawn. Bard studied the weapon, knowing that if their swords clashed, his own would break apart instantly. His old and weakened self could not match Jog head-on. His only chance for victory was to measure Jog's rhythm, charge forward, and run past Jog's right side, then slice through Jog's left flank while moving through the opening. Bard prepared himself as Jog stepped forward. Suddenly, Bard froze. He could not move at all, not even an inch. As a warrior who had relied on his skills in battle since he was young, he had recently felt that his tune was somehow off. He had resolved to be ready when such a moment came, yet of all times, it had happened now. Bard closed his eyes for a moment before accepting that it could not be helped. He pushed forward with all his strength and charged toward Jog. Jog reacted in surprise as Bard moved faster than expected. Bard dove past Jog's side, but Jog swung his greatsword and struck him. Bard's cloak tore away from the impact, and Jog struck his weapon in annoyance. Bard gritted his teeth and pressed forward, but Jog's blade cut deep. Bard dropped to one knee while keeping his sword raised. Jog stepped forward, but Bard swept his leg and sent him sliding back. Jog recovered quickly and swung his greatsword again. Bard leaped to avoid the blow, surprising Jog once more. He landed and readied his weapon again. Bard stood firm, but Jog closed the distance and landed a heavy blow. Bard cursed under his breath as he realized that this was the moment he had been waiting for. He moved in close and drove his blade forward. Jog smiled as the strike landed. Jog drove his own blade forward, but its tip stopped against something hard beneath Bard's cloak. Bard became confused, and Jog soon grew irritated by Bard's silence. Jog grabbed Bard's hand and demanded an explanation for what he was doing, as though Bard were looking down on him. He held Bard's arm tightly and glared at him. Bard met his gaze steadily. Both remained silent. Jog cursed and released his grip. He kicked the guards aside and walked away. Bard watched him leave before returning to the house of the village head. The woman called out to Bard in relief, and the village head thanked the gods that he was safe. She repeatedly apologized, explaining that everything had happened because she had spoken too freely. Bard assured her that it was all right and that he understood. He added that things could have gone much worse and that injustice must never be allowed to pass. He then asked for a glass of water, and she agreed to bring him as many drinks as he wished. Bard sat silently when Julchaga suddenly peeked in front of him. Julchaga had thought Bard was a goner and asked whether he was really all right after hearing the loud clash. Bard explained that Jog had struck his chest, but the pain had already faded. He pulled out the small engraved knife he had placed in his pocket and realized that it had saved him. Julchaga saw it and became interested in disassembling and analyzing it, since it was the same object he had seen the previous day and had remained curious about it ever since. Bard stopped him, but Julchaga disregarded the objection and began doing what he had intended. Bard drank his water and looked at his hand, recalling how Jog had shown off his energy earlier. Julchaga then discovered that something had popped out of the knife. It was a manet, a holy silver, though it was small. Julchaga noticed the engraved family crest on it and recognized it as the thing known as the seal. Bard confirmed that it was indeed a seal. Bard remembered that he had received the knife from Lady Idra. Julchaga reacted in surprise and remarked that something so important would not normally be forgotten, especially since Lady Idra was important to Bard. Bard tried to excuse himself by recalling that it had happened a long time ago and that he had grown accustomed to the knife, as though it were one of his own belongings. The manet was one of the double spirals, or the seal. The Coendra family had been desperately searching for this item. The truth of what had happened at Lakeside was also connected to Lady Idra. Bard realized that he had to hurry. Whether he managed to meet the envoy before Caldus did was the key to the entire incident. Julchaga looked on silently. Elsewhere, Caldus Coendra, head of the Coendra family and great lord of the Shiguensa province, slammed his hand hard against the bookshelf, sending volumes crashing to the floor. He struck the wall in anger, shattering a candelabra and leaving the room filled with scattered books and debris. A knock sounded at the door. Caldus allowed the person to enter and ordered them to state their business. Zeon stepped inside. Caldus reminded him that he had told him not to come anywhere near this place. Zeon apologized to his father, Caldus, before reporting that they had just received some astonishing information. Caldus demanded to know what the information was. Zeon began explaining that it concerned the seal, with Julchaga appearing beside him. The scene shifted to a hallway, where one person remarked on the wonderful place. Another noted that the two had met there 29 years earlier and had grown their love together in that very spot. A messenger called out to the imperial envoy, announcing that the preparations for their departure to the capital were complete. The other person acknowledged the announcement. Priest Todd then declared that they would proceed to meet the child born between King Wendelin and Princess Idra. They were traveling to welcome Prince Julran. Chapter 11 begins with Vari, also known as Priest Todd, preparing for departure. Before entering the carriage, he looks out over their kingdom. In his thoughts, he asks King Wendelin to wait for him just a little longer, as his 30-year-old dream is about to be granted. Inside the carriage, Vari's companion remarks that a young man surrounded by the frontier provinces rose to become the king of a nation that sounds as though it came straight out of a fairy tale. Vari agrees that it really does seem that way. His companion then recalls that, if he is not mistaken, the king's mother was assassinated. Everyone falls silent, leaving his companion feeling awkward. He apologizes for bringing up such a story. Vari confirms that the event did happen and explains that it became the spark for His Highness to rule the country. The event occurred 29 years ago. His Highness's mother had been a beautiful and intelligent person whom the king loved dearly at the time. However, she was of low status within her household and stood out too much in the Palsam kingdom, where conspiracies were commonplace. His Highness also could not afford to remain within the nation's borders. At that moment, Lord Coendra offered to house him at his other residence. The scene shifts to 29 years ago, in the year 4241, within the Dalba province of the eastern frontier provinces. Wendelin Seagulls, prince of the Palsam kingdom, walks outside and wonders how long it has been since he was last able to walk freely like this. He looks around and notes that this place is definitely not Palsam. He reads a letter from his best friend. The message contains a prayer that they may meet and talk again and reminds Wendelin that their heart is always with him. Holding the letter, Wendelin thinks of Priest Vari by name. He had depended on the Marquis of Gadusha when the Marquis was summoned, and somehow managed to escape to this place. He reflects on the day mentioned in the message and wonders whether it will ever come. Wendelin sits alone beneath a tree. Night falls and he stands at a window, noticing a light in the distance. Someone is there. He then remembers his conversation with Caldus. Caldus Coendra, lord of the Dalba district, greets him and welcomes him to the frontier provinces. Wendelin expresses his deep gratitude, but Caldus explains that no thanks are necessary. The Marquis of Gadusha is a blood relative of his from his mother's side, and helping at his request is only natural for someone like a parent. Caldus tells Wendelin that he will guide him to a residence that he may use to his heart's content. Servants have also been prepared for his safety, and if anything is not to his liking or he has any concerns, Wendelin should not hesitate to contact him. Wendelin has only one request. Caldus asks what it is. Wendelin mentions the small residence on the other side of the lake. Caldus firmly orders him never to approach it, no matter what happens. The next day, Wendelin goes there anyway. He stands among the trees, staring at the building. Seeing an open window, he decides to take a quick look and climbs a tree to get a better view. He moves closer to the window, hoping to catch a glimpse inside. As he peers through it, a woman notices him and reacts in surprise. Idra asks who Wendelin might be. He reacts in surprise, and the tree branch cracks beneath his grip. He loses his balance and falls with a shout. Idra rushes outside to help him up and checks whether he is all right. Wendelin assures her that he is fine, explaining that he simply landed on some bushes. Idra is relieved to hear this. Wendelin then assures her that he is definitely not someone suspicious. Idra smiles, remarking that he certainly does not look like a bad person. Wendelin asks whether she is alone. Idra explains that she is there with two maids, though from his perspective, he could consider her to be alone. Wendelin then held Idra's hand and asked whether it would be all right for him to come see her again. They began meeting often, sharing tea and books and walking side by side among the trees. In time, Wendelin bowed his head before Caldus and confessed that he wanted Princess Idra. Caldus realized that Windolent had met Idra and reminded him that he had done the one thing he had been told not to do, questioning whether he thought such behavior was permissible. Windolent fell silent before admitting that he could no longer hold back his feelings. He insisted that he would send a report to the Marquis of Gadusha himself and implored Caldus to approve of their relationship. Caldus concluded that if Windolent was willing to push matters that far, he had no choice. The princess's family might resent him to some extent, but when the prince of a large nation showed such strong affection toward his fiancée, he could not pretend not to notice it. Caldus accepted the situation and asked Windolent to take good care of the princess. Windolent expressed his deep gratitude. Later that night, he stood by the window and looked out beneath the crescent moon, and time continued to pass. One day, a messenger announced to the prince that the baby had been born and that it was a healthy boy. Windolent stepped forward and looked with wonder at the child resting in Idra's arms. Idra met his gaze, and they shared a quiet, tender moment. Tears of joy fell from Windolent's eyes as he gently took Idra's hand in his own. He revealed that he was thinking of giving the child the name Julran. Idra reacted in surprise before realizing that he had finally reached a decision. Windolent apologized for taking so much time, but Idra reassured him that there was no need to worry because this was one of the most important moments in their child's life. She repeated the name Julran softly and noted that it would be Julrant in Windolent's country. Idra smiled, pleased with the truly wonderful name. One night, Windolent read the letter beneath the candlelight. He sat alone at the table with his head bowed in thought. He then went to Idra and revealed that he had to return to his nation. A coup had occurred in Palsum, and if he allowed this opportunity to slip away, he would never be able to return to his country. He wanted Idra to come with him if possible, but Palsum was filled with conspiracies, and he feared that Idra and Julran would be killed just as his mother had been. Windolent swore that someday he would win peace with his own hands and return to take her with him. Until then, he asked her to wait for him. Idra agreed and urged him to take care of himself. Windolent then called out to Idra and gave her something. She was surprised to find a seal in his hand. Windolent explained that it was something no one aside from the royal family of Palsum was permitted to possess. No matter how much time passed, the seal would surely guide him back to her and Julran. Back in the present, Vari recalled that Windolent's efforts after returning to Palsum had been tremendous. Windolent worked to improve himself in knowledge, spirit, and martial arts while accumulating achievements. He increased the number of his allies and, through those achievements, created a place for himself. Windolent was eventually able to grasp the crown. He had done everything he could to welcome his beloved wife and son. Vari's companion remarked that Windolent was truly close to his goal because Princess Idra had passed away just the other day. Everyone fell silent, and his companion apologized. Vari stated that death was beyond anyone's grasp, but that was precisely why they had to return to the king along with Prince Julran. The envoy's party arrived at Coendra's residence. Zeon informed Caldus that the envoy and his group had arrived. Caldus greeted the envoy in the hallway and introduced himself as the head of the Dalba district and lord of the Shigwensa region. He then presented his son, Zeon. Vari remarked that he had heard much about Caldus from his highness and introduced himself as Varian Quezcaltad, though everyone simply called him Vari. Caldus mentioned that Vari must be tired after such a long journey, but Vari replied that the trip had actually been fun. Vari quickly asked where Prince Julran was, explaining that whenever he thought about the happy face of his highness, he could no longer contain himself. Caldus paused before revealing that Prince Julran was right in front of Vari's eyes. Vari became confused. Caldus then stated that Zeon was the real Prince Julran. Vari was delighted. Caldus explained that he had known this day would come, which was why, 28 years ago, he had switched the two infants and carefully raised the real prince. He added that the proof confirming the boy's true identity was ready. A maid stepped forward carrying a tray, and Vari reacted in surprise upon seeing what she held. Caldus confirmed that the item he had received from Princess Idra when the babies were switched was the seal. Vari recognized it as unmistakably one of the Palsum Kingdom's seals. He added that they would not be able to appraise it further without returning to the country, but that it was certainly the king's seal. Caldus explained that there was, however, a problem and brought up the double whirlpool. Regarding the whirlpool, they had heard nothing from Princess Idra at the time, and no matter how hard they searched, they had been unable to find any clues. Caldus questioned whether the seal alone would be enough to prove the prince's identity. Vari considered that it might be a good time to discuss the matter. He explained that the whirlpool was actually a line from a poem. The first verse described two whirlpools that melted together when they met, just as Windolent and Idra had met at that beautiful waterfront. If the princess had truly loved his highness, she would never have been able to forget those words. However, Princess Idra had passed away, leaving no way to confirm them. Thus, Vari confirmed that the seal remained the sole proof of the prince's identity. The scene shifted to a moonlit night and then to a stone room lined with bookshelves, where Caldus sat surrounded by piles of books and papers. He took a cup and raised it to the future of the Coendra family. He found it amusing that he had never expected everything to fall so neatly into place. The envoy now believed that Xian was Julren and that the prince had returned to the kingdom. Caldus found it difficult to believe that a boy with no courtesy could rise to become the king. On top of that, he had received no news from Windolent for 28 years, only for Windolent to suddenly write him a letter demanding the princess and his son. Caldus admitted that he had broken out into a cold sweat at that moment. With this, Caldus was the father of the next candidate for the throne of Palsum. He declared that he would not die as a nobody in some country town. He felt certain that he had won. Bard was surely searching around as well, but Caldus insisted that it was far too late. Xian had already left for the capital, while Idra, the one person who had witnessed everything, was dead. Caldus smashed the vessel in a fit of rage and declared that Bard could come after him whenever he wished. This time, Caldus would take everything Bard had. Chapter 12 opens in the year 4271, inside Coendra Castle in the Dalba district. Bard Loen rides up to the castle gates on horseback. The maid tells him that she will keep the other person's equipment safe while they are inside. After a while, another maid asks Bard to follow her. They walk together through the long, quiet hallways of the castle. Contrary to his expectations, Bard is allowed to pass quite easily. He had expected at least one incident or something similar. They have already gone quite deep inside and are continuing even deeper. Bard does not see a single person, nor does it appear that any troops are being hidden there either. The maid opens the doors and steps aside. Inside, Caldus is waiting for Bard and welcomes him to his castle. He considers being given the honor of welcoming the people's knight one of his dreams. Bard suspects that soldiers may be hidden behind the tapestries on both sides. He also notices that even the chief vassal, Vakra, is nowhere to be found. He wonders whether Caldus thinks he will be safe if he takes away Bard's weapons. Bard knows that Caldus does not trust anyone. Caldus considers the day truly wonderful and proposes a toast. Bard considers that when someone shows weakness to an exceptional individual, that person will take advantage of it, and he assumes that this is exactly what Caldus intends. The two toast to each other while declaring the phrase "You la chante," or "under the sword." In this way, unsuspecting people were betrayed by Caldus, and that was how he rose to his current position. Bard finds the wine delicious and recognizes it as wine from Nosmo village, which lies right in front of the castle. He hates everything about the Coendra family, including their plots and deeds, but this wine is an exception. The wine is a deep, dark red, and when Bard gently shakes the glass, it glows with the radiance of a jewel. He breathes in its scent and reacts with surprise at its mysterious fragrance. Bard knows that wine carries two fragrances. One is the distinct scent of the grapes themselves from which it is made. The other comes from the fermentation process that turns grapes into wine, which may or may not preserve the original fragrance of the grape. This process is the mysterious force that turns ordinary grapes into alcohol. In the wine from Nosmo, both fragrances rise elegantly and maintain a great balance, serving as clear proof of its quality. Bard takes a sip and finds its flavor fresh, with a tangy aftertaste that spreads easily across his mouth. Even so, a subtle hidden acidity balances the entire experience perfectly. The aftertaste seems tinged with bitterness but eventually fades, leaving behind a refreshing sensation. It does not smell much like grapes at all, and it is quite invigorating for alcohol. Bard recalls Lord Elzera's words about the wine. Elzera had once compared the two fragrances of wine to a lady and her dress, with the dress alone being a letdown and the lady alone being insipid. In the case of Nosmo wine, Bard considers the lady wearing the dress to be the real deal. Furthermore, this well-roundedness is not something to be scoffed at. Bard and Caldus share a silent stare. Bard tells himself to endure, because whenever he sees this man's face, he begins recalling many bad memories. He wishes to drink by himself. The eastern frontier provinces have really suffered because of Caldus's ambitions. It is the same as it was 30 years ago, and it has been 3 years since Caldus became the lord. Bard will never forget. It was in the midst of an emergency situation in which 17 Kjil appeared at the same time. The story goes back to the year 4240 at Terja Castle in the Pakura district. One soldier calls out that there is big trouble. Someone asks what has happened and wonders whether the number of Kjil has increased. Another person admits that something is wrong and curses the trouble at Coendra. A soldier reports that the beasts are heading straight toward Terja Castle and that the enemy army has begun its advance. The soldiers react in disbelief, wondering what Caldus could possibly be thinking at such a time. One complains that ever since Caldus took charge, things have gone terribly wrong for them. Another warns that if they cannot stop the Kjil there, the entire eastern frontier will be lost. Bard concludes that Caldus is probably not thinking at all. Since Caldus has never fought a Kjil on his own, he probably thinks that Kjil are ordinary animals and has gone a little crazy. Nevertheless, he is really looking down on them that way. Bard believes that Caldus probably thinks he can take advantage of the ruckus with the Kjil and then easily take this place over. Someone notes that the number of people they can send out to fight is limited and wonders how long they will be able to hold out. Bard states that this is exactly why he will also fight. His companion agrees that he is right, but upon realizing what Bard means, they question what the hell he is saying and whether he is insane. Someone remarks that, if they remember correctly, Bard's ribs were already done in. Bard explains that they are not broken yet and that he can still move his arm, though it hurts. His companions still insist that he lie low. Bard maintains that if the opponent were a Kjil, he would certainly die, but against a human, he would not. He declares that he will show them the latent energy and potential of Tertia. With that, Bard continues fighting. On the way, they kill two of Koendra's veteran commanders. They use their momentum to try to crash into the main army and take the head of the leader as well. Bard spots Kaldis and calls out his name. Kaldis recognizes Bard Loen. A guard tells Kaldis to retreat and vows that he will not let Bard pass. Bard clicks his tongue and presses forward. He throws something in Kaldis's direction, and Kaldis reacts in shock as he dodges it. Bard makes it clear that he will not let Kaldis escape. The guards declare that Bard shall not pass. Bard clicks his tongue. Bard explains that he was unable to deal with the soldiers as he had intended because his ribs became fractured, and as a result, he was not able to chase after Kaldis. From that point onward, Kaldis never showed up on the battlefield again. But it was not just this battle. Using Princess Idra as an excuse, they fought 5 more times, and further conflict arose because of the whole matter concerning their financial resource, the Silver Mine Mountain. Bard reflects that the story will have no end if he talks about the number of times they fought concerning the Pakura district alone. Kaldis remarks that it seems Bard was having a ball sniffing around them and seeks confirmation that this was the case. He then asks Bard whether he knows that the Lord's Conference will be held in 5 days. Bard admits that he did not know. Kaldis laughs and supposes that would be the case. He announces that at that conference, he will declare that his territories and the surrounding lands will officially become a part of the Palsam Kingdom. Kaldis is sure he will be granted an appropriate title such as the Unifier. He explains that the Koendra family will administer and rule over trade and taxation, and that he can also promise the lords of each province considerable remuneration. He wonders whether Bard is not curious about why he would be able to do this, explaining that it is because the Palsam Kingdom will back him. Bard asks why, and Kaldis tells him to guess. Bard is sure it has something to do with King Windolent. Kaldis chuckles, remarking that Bard did know, just as he expected. Bard explains that he heard everything from the princess maid about what happened back at the lake. Kaldis says that speeds things up and remarks that Bard already knows about Julrin. Bard knows that Julrin was not the boy born between Kaldis and Idra, but between the king and her. Kaldis chuckles and wonders whether Bard came there on some business concerning that matter. He explains that no matter what Bard does now, it is too late, calling it a pity. Bard asks what he means. Kaldis explains that when the princess returned to the Tertia family, they switched Julrin and his own son Xion. It was a secret from the princess, and he kept under the sword. No matter how favored Bard was by the princess, it was something she could not tell him. Kaldis says that his son Xion, then corrects himself and explains that the real Prince Julrin has already departed for Palsam with the envoy and his party. He declares that he is going to be the father of the next king of Palsam. He marvels at how a noble of a district in the Bunis is going to be the father of a king of a great nation. He laughs loudly at the thought. Bard asks what happened to the whirlpool and the seal. Kaldis acknowledges that the only 2 pieces of proof that someone is the son of the king are the whirlpool and the seal. He explains that the whirlpool seems to have been a stanza from a poem. Bard becomes confused. Kaldis explains that it is a poem of love from the king to the princess. But now that she is dead, there is no way to confirm it. Kaldis asks whether Bard knew this. Bard admits that he did not. Kaldis explains that the sole remaining proof, the seal, was taken back from Bard by the Gorashaera. Bard asks what Julchaga did, and Kaldis confirms that this is right. Jayenzara died, but the order still stood. Then Julchaga came to him with the seal in hand in order to sell it to him. Kaldis remarks that it was very expensive. Bard understands. Kaldis addresses Bard Loen and explains that he was disappointed to hear that Bard cast away his masters, the Tertia family, and left on a journey. He calls Bard the one who has impeded his plans for the longest time. He admits that he thought he would be able to use Bard as a herald to announce the beginning of his era. Kaldis continues by explaining that he heard about the seal and the whirlpool from a servant of the Marquis and panicked when he heard Bard was heading to Rince. He had thought Bard was in possession of the seal, that Bard knew about the poem, and that he was on his way to the Palsam Kingdom, but he was wrong. He adds that Bard did not look into the matter at all and did not know anything of importance. Kaldis claims that he learned what needed to be known and was able to grasp the essential items. Kaldis orders Bard to obey him. He warns that otherwise, the Tertia family will lose all their territory. He adds that he will not stop there either. The Tertia family made Princess Idra suffer and drove her to her death, and because of that, he will make them pay and annihilate the Tertia family. He proclaims that from today onwards, his words are the truth. Caldus then tells Bard that he was too late and once again demands that Bard obey him. Chapter 13 continues inside Koendra Castle, where Caldus looks fiercely at Bard. Bard looks toward the window and observes that the dust has been caught up in the commotion and is energetically dancing because Caldus has been shouting and creating a ruckus. The tiny dust particles probably believe that they are the ones jumping around and making a great fuss, unaware of how small and insignificant they are, to the point that even if someone were to grasp some of them, infinite dust particles would still remain. Caldus calls out to Bard and demands his response. Bard wonders how far the envoy and his party must have traveled by now. Caldus explains that the envoy left 10 days ago, crossed the Uber River, and should now be riding in a horse carriage in the capital. Bard considers this great news before placing a document on the table. Caldus reacts in shock and stammers upon seeing it. Bard knows that Caldus vaguely remembers exactly what the document is. It is a record detailing the amount of money sent to Caldus every year by the king through the Marquis of Gadulisha to cover the princess's living expenses and the costs of raising her child. That money never reached the princess, not even once. Bard suspects that Caldus likely embezzled the funds and used them to cement his authority over the Koendra family. With that embezzled money, the family pursued its ambitions and expanded its influence throughout the region. An investigation would make this fact immediately clear. Bard points out that the seal and the whirlpool should be proof that one is a child of King Windelant. Caldus acknowledges this, since the seal is in his possession and the envoy accepts it as proof, recognizing Zeon as the king's true son. Caldus insists that it is useless because the only person who could corroborate the double whirlpool poem, the princess, has died. Bard agrees that this is correct. He then asks whether Caldus knows about the custom called fingerprinting, practiced in lands near the middle of the continent. Caldus reacts with confusion. Bard explains that a fingerprint is unique to each person and serves as undeniable proof of identity. Instead of using a seal, a person dips a finger in ink and presses it onto paper, making the mark a symbol of that person's identity. A person's fingerprint never changes from birth until death. Caldus grips the paper and sees no point in Bard's explanation. He demands to know what Bard is doing and warns that stalling will not change anything because there is no way to overturn the situation. Bard agrees that, regardless of the situation, it cannot be changed. Since that is the case, he tells Caldus that he can at least listen to this last story as a sort of souvenir. Bard reveals that, in the royal family, every infant's fingerprints are taken 50 days after birth. Caldus orders him to stop, but Bard continues, explaining that a fingerprint can indicate whether an infant is connected by blood. Caldus yells for him to stop, claiming that he has no time for idle chatter, but Bard continues the story. The fingerprint of the first king of the Palsam kingdom resembled the shape of a double whirlpool. When royal blood flows through a person's veins, it is common for the double whirlpool pattern to appear in that person's fingerprint as well. Any resemblance to the first king's fingerprint serves as proof that an infant has inherited his blood. Bard explains that this is an important characteristic required to inherit the position of king. Caldus orders Bard to shut up. Bard continues by explaining that although King Windelant's mother was of low birth, he was able to claim the position of king entirely because he possessed that proof. 29 years ago, when the child was born at the lakeside manor, the king remained faithful to tradition and took the infant's fingerprints 50 days after birth. That fingerprint was exactly like the prince's. In other words, it was exactly like the first king's. The prince was delighted, and Bard is certain that the prince may have felt something close to destiny. Those fingerprints have always been in the possession of King Windelant, and Bard is certain that the king is taking great care of them even now. Caldus trembles nervously at the prospect of what will happen to Zeon. Bard explains that Zeon misrepresented himself as the son of the king, so he is certain Zeon will receive the death penalty. Caldus reacts with disbelief, unable to accept that such a convenient outcome could not exist. If things continue this way, everything he has worked for will fall apart. Everything had been progressing so smoothly that even the envoy had promised a future for the Koendra family. Caldus then wonders why the envoy lied about the whirlpool in the first place and why Bard is so well informed about the affairs of the royal family. He realizes that Bard must have passed the envoy and his party without his knowledge. Bard recalls that Caldus had told him something about being too late. He explains that he anticipated Caldus's actions and met with the priest beforehand. Bard told the priest the truth as he knew it, and it was the priest himself who told Bard about the royal family and their finances. The scene returns to the earlier meeting between Bard, Julchaga, and Vari. Under the blanket, they light a candle as they confer. Bard reveals that he has obtained the proof and is now returning the seal to Vari. Vari receives the seal and trembles with excitement at how enjoyable the situation is. Bard laughs, finding it reminiscent of a return to childlike innocence. Vari admits that he had always wanted to try something like this at least once. Jelchaga asks whether Vari has never done anything like this before, and Vari confirms that he has not because of his status. Jelchaga teases him for letting the opportunity slip away. Bard remarks that important people have it tough, prompting Vari to laugh. Vari wonders what they should do next. If Lord Coendra learns about the fingerprints, he wonders whether Kaldis would simply give up. Bard doubts that. He knows that if Kaldis makes even one wrong move and begins to fear for his life, he will start running away with all his might, because that is the kind of man he is. Vari finds this troubling. They agree that there must be a way for things to proceed smoothly. Bard then turns to Jelchaga and acknowledges that what he is about to suggest may be somewhat dangerous, but asks whether Jelchaga is willing to make some money. Bard instructs him to go and sell the seal to Kaldis. Jelchaga reacts with surprise before accepting the task. Bard tells him that once it is done, he will be free to do as he pleases. Jelchaga checks whether that is truly fine, and Bard explains that even now there is no compelling reason to keep him there. Jelchaga finds the reasoning convincing. Vari then calls their attention and asks what he can do to help, eager to take part. Bard asks him to come up with a convincing story regarding the whirlpool that can deceive Kaldis. He explains that people would be more willing to accept an explanation given by the priest, making it far more convincing that way. The priest considers the request and understands. Vari decides that he will think of something and promises to come up with an interesting explanation. Back in the present, Bard reflects on how remarkable it is that the priest described the whirlpool as a love poem shared between the king and the princess. The priest is quite the romantic. Kaldis trembles in fear at the thought that Bard intends to kill him. Bard reflects that Kaldis was originally supposed to be a far more intelligent man than this. Although Kaldis's methods had been rash and forceful, he had still managed to expand his domain and build it up well. However, the instant King Windolent became king and sent the letter, everything changed. The strength of his affection for his wife and child was clearly expressed in that letter. At that time, Kaldis's actions had been correct from a military standpoint. Even though he had to spend all the money he had, he managed to usurp the Nora family and win the seat of the Great Lord. Once he became the Great Lord, even a prince would have difficulty exacting revenge for personal reasons. As things stood, Kaldis had merely sent the prince's wife and son back home. Although the sin of embezzling the funds meant for childcare would remain, the debt the prince owed Kaldis for hiding him and yielding the would-be queen to the prince without much resistance could never disappear. The instant it was decided that the prince would ascend to become king, everything was turned around. The weight of embezzling a king's funds meant for his eldest child was completely different. If Julran were to obtain power and authority in the Palsam kingdom, the Terja family would gain a strong ally and backup. The families that supported the Coendra family would face decline and, eventually, destruction. Bard concludes that Kaldis must have desperately sought a way to ensure the survival of both himself and the Coendra family. While weighing his options, Kaldis discovered that Bard was leaving the Pakura district and heading for Rint. Of all the possible times, Bard had chosen this particular one. Bard had also left the Terja family, which was something that did not conform to his status. Kaldis must have thought that Princess Idra had either handed something over to Bard or was attempting to hand something over to him. Seen from that perspective, Bard can understand why Yodish displayed such strange interest in the bag containing gold coins. He can also now understand why Jayenzura attacked. Thus, the attacks failed twice. Kaldis had not even properly used the strongest pawn in his hand, the Red Crow, who was Ven Ural. To make matters worse, he ended up firing him. Bard points out that if Kaldis had not let the Red Crow go, Ven would have been able to kill him. Kaldis insists that he was not the one who dissolved the contract. He had told Ven that if he killed Bard, the reward would be increased. However, the fool Jayenzura dismissed Ven and, on top of that, sent assassins after him. In the end, they lost 2 knights who were truly skilled. Bard thinks of what a pitiful person Kaldis is and wonders how anyone could have been deceived by him. He remembers friends and subordinates who died with regret. He remembers knights and soldiers who lost their lives during pointless disputes over territory. He recalls farmers who sold their daughters because taxes had been set so high that they felt they had been extorted by a highway robber. He remembers merchants who had been forced to close their shops as the flow of goods and money broke down. And on top of all that was Lady Idra. Bard knows that Idra was a woman whose soul shone like a light, a great person with a gentle, kind, and elegant heart. She had been forced into a life in which she could only walk in the shadows. The reason for all of it was Kaldis Coendra. Bard knows that Idra deserved to see more springs and autumns come and go, to live longer, and to experience the vast world. He forbade himself from thinking such thoughts. Princess Idra's life was not cheap enough to be ruined by someone like Kaldis. Her life stood at a height that a man like him could never reach, and her flame had been extinguished at that very height. That was what Bard had kept telling himself. Kaldis trembles as he looks up, horrified by the darkness of Bard's expression. Bard stares at him, his insides burning with wrath. Chapter 14 opens with Bard striking Kaldus across the table and sending him crashing into the wall. Bard then grabs Kaldus by the throat and pulls him forward, cutting off his breath. Soldiers rush into the room and secure the area, surrounding the space with their weapons drawn. More soldiers enter and take up positions around the hall. Kaldus struggles as Bard holds him firmly by the neck, his face twisted with pain and helplessness. One soldier calls out to Lord Kaldus, while another reacts in shock and stammers upon seeing Bard. Bard glances at them, and the soldier is overcome by such overwhelming pressure that he becomes unable to move. The force radiates outward, causing those nearby to collapse under its weight. Bard reminds Kaldus that he had mentioned a Lord's conference scheduled for 5 days later. He lists the mountain prophets and the right to collect taxes from villages that had been stolen from the Terja family, ordering Kaldus to return everything at the upcoming meeting. He also demands that Kaldus withdraw all unjust taxes levied against the other district. Kaldus struggles to breathe and coughs as Bard releases his hold. Bard then stretches out his hand and commands Kaldus to return Idra's letter. Kaldus reaches into his clothing, takes out the folded paper, and holds it out. Bard takes the letter and opens it, recalling Idra. Bard then tells Kaldus that there is something he must understand. Lady Idra had lived a peaceful and happy life, entirely unrelated to Kaldus's ulterior motive. Someone like Kaldus could never hope to interfere with the life of such a great individual and escape unscathed. That is why Bard has no basis for exacting revenge upon Kaldus. Bard draws his sword and warns Kaldus that if he ever stretches out a hand with impure intentions toward the Terja family or attempts to hinder their holy duty, there will be consequences. He swings his sword, leaving Kaldus with a warning. Kaldus covers his head, and when he looks up, he sees Bard strike hit a soldier in the head, pinning the soldier against the wall. Kaldus is shaken. He gasps and sinks back against the wall. Bard turns and walks away. The soldiers stand aside and let him pass. Bard looks at his things, and even the maid is shaken by his presence. When Bard reaches the entrance, soldiers rush toward him and order him to halt. One soldier demands to know what the commotion is about and what Bard has done. Bard explains that he merely had a little talk with the owner of the castle and is leaving now. He orders the soldier to move aside. The soldier insists that Bard cannot simply walk through the place and expects him to listen. Bard challenges them to try and stop him. He moves past the guards with ease, and they fall back, unable to block his path. Bard continues walking as soldiers drop to the ground and others watch helplessly. Suddenly, someone draws a sword. The soldiers and Bard look toward the person and see that it is Jog Ward. Jog throws a soldier a distance away and recognizes the murderous intent surrounding Bard. He has always felt that Bard looked down on him, but he is pleased by what he sees and considers this the Bard he wanted to face. Jog advances toward Bard, closing the distance between them. He draws his weapon and strikes, and Bard meets the attack with his own blade. Bard blocks Jog's first strike, and their blades meet with a sharp screech of metal. Jog presses forward, but Bard counters and drives him back. Jog staggers, his boots scraping loudly against the stone floor. Bard overpowers him, and Jog drops to one knee with a grunt of pain. He then falls fully onto the ground as the soldiers watch in stunned silence. Jog grits his teeth and struggles, sweat dripping down his face as he strains against Bard's strength. Kaldus appears and orders Jog to back down. He demands that Jog stop and explains that Bard is Prince Jolrin's teacher and a father figure to him. Raising a hand against Bard would be a terrible mistake. If Jog were to harm him, the future of Coendra would be placed in danger. Kaldus coughs repeatedly, while Jog orders him to shut up and makes it clear that he does not care about any of that. Bard moves to leave, but Jog calls out to him. Bard ignores him. Jog shouts Bard's name and swears that someday he will end him. Chapter 15 opens with Bard riding a horse across the open land. He wonders whether everything was his own fault. He remembers Kaldus remarking that Bard had obstructed his plans for the longest time. Kaldus had thought he would be able to use Bard as a herald to announce the ushering in of his time. Bard suspects that Kaldus may have wanted Lady Idra as his wife because of his hatred toward Bard, as though Kaldus were attempting to steal something very important from him. Bard wonders whether that could truly have been the case, but only Kaldus could understand his own motives. Before that, Bard wonders why he remembers feeling such an intense hatred. He realizes that this is the problem. He wonders whether it was because of his affection toward the princess or because all of his actions this time had been driven by a personal grudge. Bard admits that his own grudge had been mixed into everything. He believes Kaldus deserved punishment for his actions toward Lady Idra and the Terja family. At the very least, Kaldus had to be punished for his wrongdoings. Beyond that, innocent and powerless villagers had been trampled upon by those who abused their power, and that was unforgivable. That was why Bard had become enraged and fought against Kaldus. It must have been that way. By acting in such a manner, he could protect the princess's honor. He could then boast that the princess's knight had fulfilled his vow to the very end. If it had merely been a personal grudge, Bard would have killed Kaldus then and there, and there would have been no better revenge than that. The reason Bard suppressed his grudge and allowed Kaldus to live was for the sake of the people, for peace and stability across the land. He had also done so in order to comply with the princess's request. That was how it must have been. Night falls and Bard arrives at a large manor built upon a cliff, which is Simon's residence. Bard thanks Simon, the Earl of Rince, for all his help and acknowledges that Simon truly saved him. He also remarks that Simon has a fine horse. Bard complains that his age is catching up with him and that he cannot win against it. Simon explains that he has kept a room ready so that Bard would always be welcome back and expresses relief that Bard is unharmed. Julchaga then greets Bard and praises his work, wondering how things went. Bard thanks Julchaga, explaining that thanks to him, everything proceeded smoothly. Bard reacts with surprise upon seeing Julchaga and asks whether he has already taken care of everything. Julchaga confirms that he has and that it was easy. Bard notes that only 10 days have passed since they parted ways and considers Julchaga's running speed amazing. Julchaga repeats his famous line, asking Bard to remember who he is. After the secret conference at the lakeside manor, Bard had written 3 letters. He handed the first one to the priest. It was addressed to King Windolent and described the flow of events from Bard's standpoint. As proof, Bard attached the empty case of the knife into which the seal had been inserted. He entrusted Julchaga with the other 2 letters and sent him to deliver one to Julran. The letter explained the situation and instructed Julran to leave fingerprints of all his fingers as a signature before returning the letter to Julchaga. The last letter was addressed to the Earl of Rince, Simon. Simon explains that, as instructed in the letter, the fingerprints have been sent by the Marquis to the king, and he is currently carrying out what he had prepared so that the letter will undoubtedly reach the king. Bard expresses his gratitude. Bard says that with this, the path is opened, and he no longer needs to worry about Julran or the Terja family. He suddenly wavers and nearly falls. Simon and Julchaga quickly tend to him. While Bard rests, Julchaga comes to visit and remarks on how pitiful he looks. Bard explains that whenever he relaxes even a little, his energy leaves his body and leaves him in this state. Julchaga notes that there is no avoiding it since Bard fought it out with the dude in black again. There is no reason for Bard to hurry either, so he should simply take it easy. Bard agrees that it makes sense. Julchaga then stands and explains that he has gotten to see Bard's face one last time, so it is now time for him to leave. Bard tells Julchaga that, in the end, he had done a great deal for him as well, and offers his thanks. Julchaga chuckles and says that he should be the one thanking Bard because he made a killing. He waves goodbye in hopes that they will meet again somewhere. Bard tells him to take care. After Julchaga leaves, Bard sits alone and notes that he is gone. The next day, seagulls fly above the deck of a ship. Bard stands beside Stablos while eating a piece of dried meat. He notes that it is thinly sliced, sweet, and spicy, with every bite sending an electrifying sensation across his tongue. Stablos makes a sound in response. Bard suspects that the complex flavor comes from many different seasonings and spices and that the meat was likely smoked or treated in some way beyond simply being dried. He recognizes it as stall beef jerky prepared in the style of Rince and notes that the taste is exactly what one would expect from a port town. Bard recalls that whenever they were confined within the fortress walls, Princess Idra would always provide them with beef jerky. The meat was thoroughly dried until all the moisture was gone, making it hard and tough to chew, yet every bite deepened the flavor. He remembers how the taste would spread gently through his whole body. Bard thinks that he should have asked Idra for the recipe. Stablos suddenly lunges at him. Bard reacts by wondering what has happened and what is wrong. He considers what they should do next. The financial resources have been returned, and Koendra will surely stop acting with hostility toward the region. The reason for his journey can be considered gone. Now he should be able to return to Pakuro without trouble. Still, Bard wonders whether he can truly return. Bard then takes out Idra's letter. He observes that the paper is made from bamboo leaves, something truly characteristic of Lady Idra. He recalls that she did not like it at first because the smell of the leaves was so strong. Bard reads the letter addressed to him. She wishes him good health and assures him that their friendship will remain the same, always unchanging. After reading the letter, Bard decides that it would be fine to return after all. Seagulls fly across the sky above the ship. Bard holds a piece of beef jerky and looks out toward the horizon. He thinks that the beef jerky the princess made is better than this one. He wonders what her opinion would be. He imagines that she would want to try using a variety of seasonings and spices and would ask for the recipe. Bard notes that seasonings and spices are difficult to obtain in the Pakura district, which lies deep within the frontier provinces. He recalls that it was actually Lady Idra who had wanted to travel, see the whole wide world, and eat different kinds of food, but that dream had remained unfulfilled. Bard makes up his mind to go on a journey. The frontier provinces are vast, and the settlements where people live will soon appear as nothing more than specks from afar. There are so many of them that it would take a lifetime to visit every one on foot. Bard tears the letter into tiny pieces and casts the fragments into the ocean. His gratitude and debt toward the Tertia family will never disappear, but he believes everything should be fine now. It sounds strange even to Bard to hear himself think that way, but he has done well throughout all these years. Even if he lives for a while exactly as he wishes, he is certain he will face no punishment for it. He intends to travel to places he has never visited before and see everything he has yet to see. He will enjoy life as it comes and die the same way. Bark stands on the dock with Stablos, his cloak catching the breeze as he looks out across the water toward the wide world ahead. Much farther upstream along the Uber River, the towers of the Spirit Mountain Fuser rise. The souls of dead people gather there. They are said to accept the guidance of God and then rise into paradise. Bard wonders whether the soul of the princess is riding the dancing wind toward Fuser. He then decides that they should head north. While traveling in the general direction of Fuser, they will wander around, sightseeing and enjoying different kinds of food. Bard wonders what he will do next if he is still alive by the time he reaches Fuser. He decides that they will cross that bridge when they get there.